Hello. We're here for John's service. We're still getting set up. We'll be on the live stream in just a few minutes. All right, they can see the picture, so they're not just looking at nothing.
They can watch the
they can watch the slideshow. Yeah. I think we're good with just this there. We'll move it maybe when people are talking. So. All right. Well, we don't have to stop talking. We still chat and wait, or do you want to get started, Joyce?
Well, it's kind of cool, but, you know, I think we probably should start pretty soon.
Okay, because Sandy's waiting.
Yeah.
Well, you can introduce Sacred Waters and everything.
So, I'd like to welcome you all here to Sacred Waters, to John Roncz's memorial. We're really happy that we were going to be able to provide this for him. He was a really big part of Sacred Waters at one time. When he first started coming here, he hadn't gotten into the mediumship yet, but he was all excited. He said, Joyce, I'm going to be a medium. I'm going to Arthur Findlay College. And I said, a medium? You know, what in the world is that? Oh, you know, they say I have some talent and I really need to develop it. So he went off to Arthur Findlay for a couple of courses and came back and started doing these wonderful nights here. We would have 30, 40, 50 people in this room, and John had that. His talent as a medium, he was clairaudient, which means he could hear, and he was clairsentient, which means he could feel the people's personality, which is a little bit unusual with a medium. So he couldn't actually visually see them, but he could hear what they were telling him, and he could sense their personality, which turned out to be crucial in picking out who the person was here for. You know, when you got 50 people in a room and you've got somebody on the other side and you got to figure out who they're here for, it's not easy, as Dustin can tell you. And so, you know, since he could hear so well, they would give him clues, but sometimes the clues were 2 or 3 or 4 people would have the same thing in the person. So he was able to hear well enough to get the clues narrowed down so he could nail the person that they were here for. So another one of his talents was that they always came with a message for the person that was here. There was always usually some kind of a healing that took place between the people here and what the person on the other side was coming to say. There were often unresolved issues, and John was able to pick up enough information that he could convey to the people. Oh,
that could happen on a live
what
stream.
happened?
Someone's calling me.
Somebody was calling you.
Just push the red button like that.
Okay, so anyway, yeah, so we had these great nights with John, and people really did get healings. And some people would say, I don't know why I'm here. I just felt like I should come, and somebody would have come through for them. And he would say, oh man, they're lining up. People want to come through, they're bugging me all week, you know, and some of them would be very aggressive, and he'd say, this one person, she just won't be quiet, she just wants to come through, and I have to shut them down. And so he had to work with that and learn how to do that. So he was very talented as a medium, and I'm very honored that he came here and he worked with so many people to get healed. And so I think now we're going to go into some organizations have written. You'll come up and say, okay, well, I have some stories to tell, but I'll wait and maybe I'll do that later.
So yeah, For the other people, if anyone's coming up here, just push the red button if we're getting a phone call. Hey, Kathy. You're on the live stream. Well, your voice is. Your voice. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming today. I'm going to get into the story of John and me in a bit here, but I'd like to start with first his obituary so we can get to know him a little more. So John was 75 when he passed. He passed on September 27th, 2023. It's been about 3 or 4 months now. He was the late son of P. John and Catherine Roncz, and among those predeceased are his sisters Diane and Janet, who I knew. Janet was my hygienist. Oh, you can't hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. His hygienist, my hygienist Janet, and his nephew Jason. And when he passed, he was met by his beloved soulmate and partner, Louise. Louise's ashes are at the Byodo-In Temple in Hawaii, and John's ashes will later be taken to the Byodo-In Temple. John was right-brained and left-brained, though most know him for his left-brained achievements. This obituary cannot do John's many accolades justice. He was an honors graduate of Notre Dame University, where we're all from in South Bend. He was an old master at Purdue University, and he was one of the world's best aeronautical engineers. And I'm not just saying that. He has designs in the Smithsonian Museum, Voyager and GlobalFlyer. GlobalFlyer was the first plane to circumnavigate the globe on a single tank of gas. And that was John's design of the airfoil. So John Roncz is actually a big deal. He wasn't just a medium from a small town who's coming up here, you know. He was very well known for his achievements in engineering. Many of John's aircraft designs were created as international projects, and he would have to receive government clearance to work with Australia, China, Israel, and many other countries. John was honored with many awards and recognitions. One of his best awards that he ever got was from Prince Philip. And John was flown to England to be given an entire awards dinner ceremony and given a Grand Master medal by Prince Philip himself for his design of the Eagle aircraft. John told me that he really enjoyed that time because they looked into John and they knew that he was gay, and so they paired him with a young gay escort when he got off of the carriage, and he took him into the royal palace and the food ceremony, and I remember John said he really liked that. He had a thing for young men. That shouldn't come very surprising. There's a lot of young guys out there. I was young once. John was a distinguished lecturer for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and he would be asked regularly to speak at colleges. The side of John many might not know is the right brain. John was a Jewish Buddhist spiritualist, and I will talk a little bit about what that means. John followed the mystical branch of Judaism known as Kabbalah. So a lot of people don't believe you can be Jewish and Buddhist in a medium. But in the mystical branch of Judaism, it's possible. So a lot of mystics, it's very similar. If anyone knows mysticism, it's kind of branches across religions and spiritual traditions. When John met Louise, his partner, who we'll get into that story later, he started to experience spiritual phenomena that he could not explain. These spiritual experiences, combined with Louise passing when he went missing while sailing in the ocean in Mexico, was when he started to really embrace his spiritualist journey. So John was a firm believer in reincarnation. but it was the spiritual phenomena and Luis's passing that really moved him into spiritualism. And so that's how he really started to recognize Judaism, spiritualism, and Buddhism. It was soon after John seeked spiritual healing and closure after Luis's passing that he discovered he was a psychic medium and energy worker. And John traveled to the Arthur Findlay College, the world's foremost institution for psychic science and mediumship in Stansted, England, and upwards of 30 times, and worked with some of the best tutors in the world to develop his mediumship ability. And later, he coined his book, An Engineer's Guide to the Spirit World, which is available on Amazon. If anyone would like to order that book today, go ahead, you can pull out your phones. And it's a great read. It's a really great read, yeah. John was a devoted member of the Sinai Synagogue, and we have the rabbi's eulogy, which will be read later today by Mark and Rachel. He was a member of Unity Church and Peace, and we'll get to Reverend Sandy here in about 10 or 15 minutes. And he was also a devoted member of Sacred Waters. Joyce, thank you so much for giving John a space to feel included. That really meant a lot to him. At Sinai, John engaged in Torah readings, chanting Kaddish, and he attended Shabbat services. John also loved to sing. He was a classical pianist, and he would volunteer his musical talents for community events at Sinai Synagogue and Unity Church alongside his mentee and son figure, Dustin Livers. That's me. At Sacred Waters, John and Dustin would attend meditation groups on Wednesdays. Do you remember those days? And John would conduct his group mediumship events at Sacred Waters on a love donation basis. He loved his work for spirit. John and Dustin would raise money together for various charities around Michiana by engaging in psychic mediumship readings for organizations like Moose Heart, Hello Gorgeous, Elks Club, Special Olympics, Center for the Homeless, and many, many others that aren't on this list. Among all of this, John was a strong advocate for gay rights and LGBT+, and was a part of many historical movements in the United States. John was involved in the March on Washington, the Stonewall riots, and he was a member of the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C. John would fly his own plane from South Bend because he was a pilot, and he would fly every weekend, and he would go to the Gay Men's Chorus rehearsals. And he was also a member of the Gay Men's Pilot Association in aviation. When John was not working, volunteering, or advocating, he loved to gamble at casinos. Me too, I have my card right here. He loved watching RuPaul's Drag Race. He was a super big fan. Every time he would come over, he'd have it playing on the TV. He would have you sit down and you'd watch an episode with him. And he loved to travel the world with his friends, which many of you today have gone places with John. One of his favorite places was Hawaii. And we'll talk a lot more about why that was his favorite place later. And he was also a foodie. So as you can see, John photoed here with his famous miso-yaki butterfish, which is one of his favorite meals. He would take anybody he loved and he would go to Roy's and he would want the miso-yaki butterfish. That's what he would order all the time. John had a deep appreciation for the arts. He would teach piano lessons. He taught the rabbi's children. He would mentor others in other languages. He knew Hebrew. He knew Greek. He was very, very well learned in the arts. And he loved attending shows and musicals around the world. John's favorite shows include The Lion King, which he saw in England, The Book of Mormon, which he took me to see. We went in Chicago. And The Phantom of the Opera, which I gifted him a ticket. We went together. John would self-identify as a Jewish mother. He was well known for cooking. Some of his favorite dishes that he would cook include chicken paprikash, homemade chicken noodle soup. He would make miso-yaki butterfish, it was actually really good. brisket, and his famous Asian salad. He would especially love to make his dishes to help others who were sick. While John loved enjoying life with his chosen family, he will be most remembered for his sense of humor, wisdom, generosity, compassion, storytelling, and his laugh. He had a very distinct laugh, which you could hear from another room. And I want to thank you all so much for coming here today and joining us, and those of you on the live stream and those of you that are present today. It's a little bit about John. How are we doing on time? Okay, Reverend Sandy can wait. I've got a couple other things. So I want to segue here to the story of how John and I met. So the first time John and I actually saw each other was in a numerology class that we took together here at Sacred Waters with Michael Hersey. I don't know, do you still talk to Michael? Is he still around? He's still around? Okay. Oh, he's in Sweden. Okay, that's right. We met here. It was a numerology class. And it was run by Joyce Hugg, who's here today at Sacred Waters. While we didn't actually talk to each other, I received a notification in my email about John's doing a trance demonstration of mediumship. Now, at this time, I was a poor college student living in the dorms at IUSB, and I was living off a box of cereal and the generosity of people at Unity Church because I had no money. And I didn't want to ask my parents for money because I had a lot of pride back then. And so when I looked at this and I asked my mom, we didn't know that it was going to cost any money. So there's actually a whole story here. So I called my mom and I said, Mom, would you like to go to this trance demonstration of mediumship? I have no idea what this is. You know, I'd never heard of mediumship, never knew anything in the psychic world, nothing. My mom said, sure, honey, let's go. So she brought her Jeep, picked me up, and we drove to Sacred Waters. And when we came to the doorway, Joyce was coming with her offering basket. And so you're supposed to give some money in the offering basket. And so there was like money involved, you know. And we had no idea. We looked at each other. My mom didn't have any money either. She's a case manager for a nonprofit organization. There's no money there. So we came in the door, and Joyce skipped us. You didn't even ask us to pay. We came in. We literally just came in. And if that wouldn't have happened, we never would have met John. After John was done doing his demonstration, he stopped talking to a man next to him, because there was a line of people that wanted to speak to him. And I came up to him. And I remember he stopped talking to the gentleman next to him. And he looked at me, and his eyes got really big, and he took a step back. And he said, you have all the colors of mediumship around you. And I had no idea what this was at the time. I had nothing. I wasn't a medium. I didn't watch any of the shows. I had nothing. This was my first ever experience. And I said, oh, I said, are you sure? I don't know about this. I said, so he says, no, you can do what I do. I said, oh, okay. So he asked me if during the event I was feeling anything. And I was. I was seeing things and feeling things, but I didn't really think anything about it. I didn't know any of that. So when I was telling him what I was feeling and seeing, he validated for me in that moment that I was linking in with him. And I was able to connect to the spirits that he was also connecting with. And it was at that point that we exchanged contact information. A few weeks later, John reached out to me because I was still doing my studies at IUSB. And when he was about to publish his book, at that time I just finished an advanced college placement course where I was editing and reviewing college level writing. And I volunteered to proofread and make the edits. So John and I met. He gave me the email of his book, and I actually printed it out in the library. I used the money from IUSB, so thank you, Kathy. Tell everyone. And she's a professor back there. And I had the first printed copy of John's book, and I didn't know that at the time. And I did lots of edits, lots of peer reviews, lots of this, and I gave it to him, and he thanked me. And when I met him at his house, he asked me then to give him a tarot card reading, because at that point I was doing some tarot as dad. And when I gave him the tarot reading, I remember one of the things I said was, there's a crack in the roof and it needs to be fixed. And he said to me, he's like, how do you know that? You know, and I said, I don't know, it's just here in the cards. He's like, no, it's not. He's like, you don't read tarot and say there's cracks in roofs. And, you know, that it blew him away. And he spotted my talent. He was able to experience it firsthand. And then that's when he invited me to live with him and be privately mentored by him. And we lived together for 6 years. And this wasn't just living together, we had a life together. We went to events together. We practiced and worked many, many nights together. And he made me the incredible medium that I am today. Since being with John, he was able to take me to the Arthur Finley College. I was able to become the lead medium with Michiana Paranormal Investigations. You can Google them later. And I was able to become the youngest, and I'm still the youngest, and the only accredited Forever Family Foundation medium in the world. I'm the only one in the Midwest. And the FFF is a very, very big organization, and we'll talk about that later today. So that's a little bit about me and how I got to be here. And I don't know if we have time for Louise or if we should switch to Reverend Sandy. Maybe we should do Sandy now, because she said 2:30. So we're going to switch to Reverend Sandy, and then we're going to come back to the story of John and Louise. She's in there.
Recording in progress.
Oh my gosh, she's there. Look, it's working. Oh my goodness. You're here, Reverend Sandy, but hold on, we have to turn you on to the bows. This is going to get a little loud. There's some sound coming out of this. Let me see. There we go. We can see you and hear you. I'm going to mute it so you don't hear the feedback.
Okay. Oh gosh. Well, how wonderful to be joining everyone. I'm Reverend Sandy Bannock of Unity of Michiana Spiritual Center, and many of you knew it as also Unity Church of the Peace in South Bend. And I'm here visiting friends and family in Southern California, so I'm on vacation. But what a joy it is to be able to participate and honor a man of John's stature. He had such a creative wit about him. He, a little tongue-in-cheek, which was delightful. He was such a brilliant light in this world and touched people's hearts in ways not many of us will ever even realize until years down the road. But we are so grateful for this time, to honor a very special man. And that for all of us, the experience of death, of the unknown, often seems a great mystery that's, of course, difficult to face. And because we are physical beings, living in a physical world, we tend to believe that there's just nothing more to us than simply our body, which is all we can discern with our physical senses. Of course, when we're no longer able to connect with someone at this physical level, we feel that loss deeply. With our limited physical perception, death often implies to us only an ending. Yet seen differently, we might perceive death in a new light. That of shifting into a different form, a different expression, or a whole new experience, into something more expansive in God's creative and eternal realm, in that which is of all creation that is and has been and will continue to be. From 2 Corinthians 5:1 in the Bible, in Scripture it says, "For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, that which is our physical body, we have a building from God, from the eternal beingness of all that is, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." So being open to the possibility of this greater truth enables us to consider that the true allness of life and existence is more than just our physical body. We can realize that the body is but the housing of our ever ongoing soul, the clothing our soul wears for a time. Recognizing our soul, the true essence of our being, is eternal in the everlasting oneness of all that is. This thing then that we call death is simply our soul shedding the outer physical body, the outer clothing we have worn for a while, in order to shift into a new experience of being. And when Dustin asked me to be a part of this wonderful celebration of life of John, a story that I often use came to mind, and so I'm using a small excerpt from that story. Let me share that with you. Once upon a time, there was a pond filled with beautiful lily pads. In the muddy water under the lily pads, there lived a little beetle in a whole community of water beetles. They lived a simple and comfortable life in the pond with few disturbances and interruptions. Occasionally, however, one of the beetles would climb the stem of the lily pad and never be seen again. When this happened, the water beetles grieved, knowing their friend had died and was gone forever. One day, the little beetle decided to climb the lily pad stem himself. He wanted to discover what was on the other side and come back to tell the rest what he had found. He was determined he would return after his exploration above. So he climbed and climbed and climbed. When he finally reached the top of the lily pad, he fell fast asleep, exhausted from his journey. The little beetle slept for a long time. And then, when he woke up, he discovered his body had changed. He now had a beautiful blue wings and a long blue tail. He wasn't a beetle anymore. He was a magnificent dragonfly. The dragonfly stretched out his broad wings and rose above the water. He discovered a whole new world with beauty beyond his imagining. The sun was so bright and the sky so blue. He could hardly believe that this new world on the other side of the lily pad was so close to him, and yet he never knew it existed. Then he remembered his promise to return to tell his fellow beetles what was on the other side of the lily pad. They'd be so happy to hear the good news, so he wanted to go back desperately to tell them how amazing and magnificent it was on this other side. But his new body wasn't designed to swim in the water anymore. He even wondered if they would recognize him if he returned. Eventually he realized someday each one of his friends would have the courage to take this same journey, making the long climb up the stem of the lily pad. Then they would understand too. The little dragonfly missed his old friends, but he knew they would join him someday. And knowing this, he flew off into his amazing new life with great joy and excitement. From our human perspective, it's likely we find the transformation experience of death a great mystery that's difficult to perceive. And of course, there may be a reluctance to accept such great changes when someone we love passes on. Yet we can appreciate from this beautiful metaphorical story, with a broadened and more open receptivity to the everlasting nature of ongoing existence, that John has now moved up that stem of the lily pad and into a whole new expansive experience. So let's all take this time in the heart and the mind of our very being to envision John as a recently transformed dragonfly with beautiful new wings to fly free and unencumbered. The true soul being that is John has now journeyed into another realm, into a new expression of being, and has joined with those he has loved who have gone before him. It's such a wonderful story, and there's a whole book, and I believe Dustin said he purchased that book and he could share that with you. But it's always wonderful at times like these, when someone that is loved has passed to another realm, to remember that we are timeless in the heart of our being, in the soul that is ever ongoing. And to know as we each continue to carry our own memories of love, of laughter, of creative brilliance, that is John, as we carry that in our hearts and share that with each other, that John indeed lives on within us and all around us. And it is in this sharing that we too find comfort and are able to take steps forward in moving on. So thank you everyone for inviting me and for allowing me to be part of this honoring of John and this celebration of life. My blessings, John, go out to you in all your new expansive experience, and blessings to one and all. Dustin, thank you so much. Love to you.
Thank you, Reverend Sandy. Love to you too. You've been my pastor for so long. Since I was 15.
Are you giving away my age now?
You don't look any different than before.
No, it's thank you, dear. It's been wonderful. Yeah, I've served at Unity now for 15 years, and it just still surprises me. I think it was just yesterday. So it was so wonderful when all of you visited, and oh my gosh, John's tongue-in-cheek wit will always stay with me, and his brilliance. The conversations he would start with me that would really begin to open my mind, and I'm so grateful for that. So blessings for the continued celebration.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Say goodbye to Reverend Sandy. Goodbye, Reverend Sandy. There she goes. Alrighty, so Alrighty, that was Reverend Sandy at Unity Church of Peace. Isn't that a lovely story? The water bugs, beetles, and the dragonfly. Yeah, there's a little book over there. I actually was thinking about getting it for my clients with grief. Oh, do you know the story, Stacey?
No, but I'm wearing a dress.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that's intentional. This story touched me so deeply. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Reverend Sandy. So, how did that happen?
Uh-oh.
The power went out? That's crazy.
Yeah, it looks like it.
There's a lot of energy in this room. There's a lot of energy going on.
No, that's John. I said he's good.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's him. I know it.
The energy is like going out right now. That's well, while we figure that out, Joyce, while you're doing all that, I'm going to talk about the story of John and Louise. So over here is Luis, and this was a photo of John taking Luis. The live stream's still going, so you know. This is a photo of John and Luis in Hawaii together. And Hawaii was a very special place that John would take the closest people that he loved, and the Brules being one of them. And he took Luis there, and that was a very special place that the couple would go. And this photo is me 10 years ago and John took me also to go with him to Hawaii. And we also had a lovely time, and that was actually one of John's favorite memories of us together, and we'll talk about that later. The story of John and Luis starts with a not-so-famous medium at the time by the name of John Holland. John had received his first informal reading from John Holland on a cruise ship when he serendipitously met him outside on the deck of the cruise ship. So John had decided after getting this reading from John Holland that he would see him work for real publicly at an event. John flew out of Chicago O'Hare, and this trip was no different because John would always fly out of Chicago. That's what everyone does in South Bend. They all fly out of Chicago O'Hare. And this trip, he knew he would have a long layover. So he had packed a book in his bag to read for the layover. When John opened his bag in Chicago O'Hare to read, knowing that he'd be there for hours, he found a different book inside. The book was Infinite Self, 33 Steps to Reclaiming Your Inner Power by Stuart Wilde, who was an older spiritual man and author. John had read this book twice already. Oh, we're almost there. We'd read this book twice already, but he thought at this time Spirit must want him to read it a third time because it just appeared in his bag. Sorry about the lights, y'all. When John arrived in Providence for the John Holland event, he got a rental car, found himself a hotel near Brown campus for the John Holland event. The morning of, John got up early, because John was always early to everything. Every flight we ever did, we were up super early. And that's why I don't do early flights anymore. I'm done. After 10 years, it's over. I said no more morning flights anymore. And he headed towards Highway 195, only to find that it was closed off. John was very frustrated, and he drove away and tried to find a place to get directions. So he found a coffee shop near Brown to collect himself, get directions, get a cup of coffee, to kind of decompress. And John saw a young man there reading the New York Times. He approached the young man reading the New York Times and asked him for directions to how to get to this event. The young man invited John to sit down, hand drew him a map on a piece of paper, and showed him where to go. He asked John, why are you here? Where are you from? And where are you going? And John always responded very honestly. He was very open and very honest. And he told the young man, I'm going to a psychic medium event with John Holland. So you can imagine the stranger approaching you in a coffee shop saying he's going to see a psychic, right? That's like, whoa, what are you doing? The young man, very curious, had some questions. He asked John, is this stuff for real? Is this real stuff? Is this are you actually into it? And John said, yes. And he shared a lot of stories about the spiritual phenomena that had been occurring in his life. Finally, the young man asked John, okay, can you recommend a book that you could give me about spirituality and spiritual living? And John laughed, and he said, I have just the book for you. And that was at the time where they exchanged phone numbers so John could give him the book. And that young man was Luis. When John finished the event with John Holland, he called Luis and offered to pick him up on his way back from the hotel. And Luis said yes. Luis went back to John's hotel room, John gifted Luis the book, and the two of them talked until 3 in the morning. Finally, John drove Luis back to his dormitory. And before Luis left John's car, he mentioned to John that his birthday was in 3 days. John made it a point to call Luis on his birthday, and again, the two of them talked for a very long time. John met Luis at the coffee shop on May 17th, 2002. And they both believed that the meeting was orchestrated by Spirit. Luis was 19 when John and he met. He was Puerto Rican, raised in poverty from a broken home. His father left when he was a child, and his mother was on welfare his entire life. When Luis was a young teen, his mother took in a woman to help with the rent, and the woman sexually abused Luis for many years. A friend at Luis's school contacted the principal upon hearing Luis sharing about the woman who had been sexually abusing him. The police were called and showed up to him. This didn't stop him, though. Luis was a success story in his own right. As a teen, Luis joined Youth Pride and helped to support other LGBT+ teens who had experienced challenges in their lives. Luis also belonged to Youth in Action, where he volunteered his time helping disadvantaged youth and wrote an HIV+ curriculum which is still used today. It was Luis's efforts to heal from his own childhood trauma by giving back to others that earned him a full scholarship to Brown and led to him and John meeting. John and Luis experienced a lot of spiritual phenomenon together as a couple. And I have a few stories which are all in John's book. So y'all can read these stories for yourselves. If you get that book off of Amazon. Or eBay. I used to use eBay. There was a red bird. There's actually 2 birds, and they're brothers. And they aren't real birds, but there's a red bird, and then there's this other bird over here, which you guys can see that are here today, this blue bird that's sitting on this desk. The red bird was one of the first spiritual experiences that John and Luis ever had. And John, when he was feeling himself and connecting with Spirit, would often go to talk to this red bird, and the red bird would make chirping noises and sounds which were not mechanically possible, according to John the engineer. Because he said, there's no way this bird makes sounds unless you wind it up and you move it 3 times, it's not mechanically possible. But yet when John would communicate to the bird would communicate back. And when John and Luis were together, John had said, why don't you try it? And Luis said, well, I don't know, what am I supposed to say? He's like, what do I say to this bird, So Luis started talking to the bird, and the bird chirped back. And that was one of the first spiritual stories that John would share about him and Luis. Another story was when they were in Hawaii. There was a time that the couple was sharing a room in a hotel in Hawaii. And John had went outside to the balcony, and he was just, he's probably smoking a cigarette, honestly, not gonna lie. I was like, he smoked to the day he died, We were smoking together, actually. But so when he loved his cigarette, I'm not gonna sit here and pull any punches. He went out to the balcony, probably smoking. And John says, this is how the story goes, that while he was out there and Luis was in the living room, that a t-shirt and an extra, extra large flew down from the sky and landed on the balcony in his size. And now John was a large man, so it was an extra, extra large. And Luis was upset. He goes, what the, where's mine? Why do you get all these things, but I don't get any shirts or whatever? So John says, well, you just gotta ask, you just go out there. So Luis goes out there, and he asks, and another shirt falls from the sky, and it's a medium, and it fits Luis. That's one of the stories in his book. There was another time in Hawaii that the couple went to a waterfall. And when they were walking to the waterfall, John had noticed what he thought were these birds that were flying. And he went to Luis and he said, Luis, do you see these birds? Are Are you seeing the birds I'm seeing that are flying around the water? And Luis is saying, yes, I do. Now, these birds, according to the description, were very white, silhouettes, and very long, with tails draping along the back, and they were circling and flying up, like without their wings beating. And now John said, now wait a minute, usually birds flap their wings when they fly. And he said, there's something different about these birds, I don't know. So Luis and John looked and they realized, I don't think these are birds. So they start walking along the side and they run into a Hawaiian priest and they describe what they saw by the waterfall. And the priest said to them, those are not birds, those are spirits. And they're welcome, they're often sighted. People see them and describe the same things that they saw. Probably the most profound story that really impacted John is this last story. And that was when the couple, also in Hawaii, were walking into a marketplace. And when they walked away from the marketplace, they were coming to an alleyway. So you can imagine, most of us have been to a market, right? An open market. You buy fruits and vegetables and stuff. So they kind of walk away from the marketplace. They go to an alleyway. And they see a larger woman sitting at a table, sitting at a chair. And she has a pin and some string, and she's sewing leis. So she's putting Hawaiian flowers on a lei. And they approach her, because she's sitting at the table, and she says, oh, come here. She's motioning for them to come over. And they're looking at each other like, okay. And she strings the lei, she makes them, and then she hands the lei to John, and then she strings another one, and she hands it to Luis. And she says, I want you to put the lei on him, and I want you to put the lei on him. So there was an exchanging of leis. So they put the lei on each other, and they had a moment there. And then they walked away. And then John said, this is kind of weird, they didn't charge us any money, does that woman just sit at the chair all day? Just making leis, is that just what she does? In an alleyway, it's like, what? So they looked behind after they walked, down the alley, and she was gone. The woman, the chair, the table, the lei, all the flowers, everything was gone. And John and Luis were both shocked. And Luis kept that lei until it withered away to remind him that angels were real. That's how the story goes. And for John, he equates that as a marriage ceremony, an exchanging of rings. It was an exchanging of leis. That was a very profound moment for John in his story with Luis. Unfortunately, the ending was a tragic, but also a very moving force for John. On January 12th, 2006, John received an email from one of Luis's friends saying that Luis was missing. Luis had taken a vacation to Mexico with some of his friends from Brown, and they went out into the ocean to go swimming, and Luis never appeared. Luis's body was discovered 4 days after he disappeared with his friends by fishermen. And the only way his body was recognizable was by the necklace that John had gifted him for his birthday. And that necklace was of a sea turtle from Hawaii. Luis wore it every day because it meant so much to him. And that was the only way they knew. Luis was 22 years old when he died. John took half of Luis's ashes to the Byodo-In Temple, where John's will also be taken. And he had asked me on our trip to the Byodo-In Temple to take his ashes to one day be reunited with Luis's. After Luis's departure, in finishing with his ashes, John was severely depressed. He was not able to function. I remember him sharing stories with me that he was putting clothes in the washing machine, that he wasn't able to dress or care for himself. He relied heavily on his friends and chosen family to support him. John asked for a sign from Luis to help him through his grief. And it was at that moment, shortly after, that the red bird in John's room chirped. And John was so excited because he said, Luis figured out the bird. John had already booked his trip to the Arthur Findlay College shortly after Luis's death, and he was read, and Luis came through. One medium at the Arthur Findlay College, Colin Bates, who is speaking later today, we have a video from him, especially touched John when he said to John, you and Luis saved each other's lives. After Luis's departure, John started to fully embrace his identity as a medium and energy healer, and he continued to help others with their grief and help them have continued relationships with their loved ones, just as John had with Luis. There are some people here today that have met Luis. I don't know if you actually saw him. Did you guys meet him? Joyce, you met him. He's real. He existed. He did exist, yes. When he had an earthly body. That was a while ago. Sadly, I never met Luis as I arrived about 10 years later after he died. However, when John and I lived together, we also had a life with Luis. A lot of times, Luis would make the red bird chirp when I was there, and it freaked me out. Because I'm like, it's already a big house, there's lots of noises, and now all of a sudden there's stuff going on. It did a lot for my anxiety. I was freaking out, man. I couldn't sleep in that house. But there was a lot going on. I remember hearing the bird. And John would literally look at me when we were talking. He would say, hold on, Dustin, I need to take this. And he would walk into the other room, and he would have a conversation with the red bird with Luis. There was one night that John and I were listening to a recording when Luis was coming through. And the medium, I can't remember who it was, but I remember this recording and sitting there very vividly. And the medium said, oh, hold on, there's something else. There's something that Luis is telling me. And he paused, he stopped, there's this long pause in the recording. And he said, there's something about the letter D and N. And he said, but I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what these letters and John goes, I have no idea what that is. This was a long, long time ago. And when I'm sitting there at the table, I looked at John and I said, John! I said, that's me! I said, I'm Dustin. It's D and N. And he goes, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I said, you forgot I was prophesied. I said, this is before I even showed up, before we met. This was years ago. He had no idea. And so we also said our meeting was orchestrated by Spirit. Many nights together when I lived with John, I also felt Luis's presence. And occasionally I would bring through messages to John from Luis. And we had a life, all three of us. Serendipitously, John Holland, the medium who set John on his path and met Luis, is now a member of the Forever Family Foundation about a year ago. And I reached out to him and he gave me a statement, and we're actually going to be working together next week in Florida, in Fort Myers. So John Holland and I will have a lot to talk about with John. So that's a little bit about the story of me and John and Luis, and all three of us. And you can see our photos here in our little weird family that we had. It's a weird story. I feel like I'm never going to get booked for another event. People are going to watch this and be like, that weirdo. Like, the weirdest man I've ever met in my life. He's so strange. So at this time, we're going to segue. And we're going to have some speakers. So Mark and Rachel, would you guys like to come up? And we're going to have a speech about the rabbi, and then, okay. And you guys know the
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Brule. I'm a longtime friend of John. John was my good friend for 15 years. I met John during our wonderful weekly lunches at Sinai Synagogue after our Sabbath services. I need to move over here a little bit because I need a little more light. I'm dark over here. And as I get older, my eyes aren't so good.
Oh, we can see it. Oh,
Okay, are we good? That's better.
oh, it's fine. We can move it.
So, John and I quickly became friends, and usually we would have lunch together over the years. Over the years, our friendship grew. In January of 2012, Rachel and I spent a week with John in Hawaii at an oceanside condo that he rented. Of course, we had a fantastic trip. I'm pretty sure that I never would have gone to Hawaii if it wasn't for John. Our friendship continued to grow over the years. I was always fascinated by him. John was one of the most interesting, brilliant, generous, kind, and loving people that I had ever met. His Wikipedia page states that he was an inventor, businessman, computer expert, book author, and world-renowned aeronautical engineer specializing in aerodynamics. He had many professional accomplishments in his area of engineering expertise. Along with aircraft and race cars, John designed the sail for the racing yacht Stars and Stripes, which won the America's Cup race in 1988. John was also responsible for the wing design of 2 aircraft that are currently housed in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. These world record-breaking airplanes are called Voyager and GlobalFlyer. Along with being a world-class aeronautical engineer, John was also deeply spiritual. As many of you know, he chose to become Jewish after studying Hebrew, the Jewish scriptures, and developing a close relationship with Rabbi Cooperman at Sinai Synagogue. John loved chanting from the Torah and leading various services. He often chose to chant portions with very difficult musical note patterns. He loved the challenge and always did a great job. In late 2012, John completed and published his book, An Engineer's Guide to the Spirit World, My Journey from Skeptic to Psychic Medium. His understanding and abilities in mediumship was truly out of this world. John was definitely the first medium that I had ever met. We spent hours discussing what John lovingly described as talking to dead people. I always had many questions, and John provided very satisfying and rational answers. His mediumship even extended to different forms of energy healing. John had a great desire to contribute his psychic abilities and talents to comforting and healing others. John studied trance healing at the Arthur Findlay College in England as part of his mediumship training. And he was eager to use this healing skill on anyone who required it, all free of charge. Overall, John loved being a medium. One of the most powerful messages that often came from John's public and private readings was the following. When we lose people that we love, of course we're sad, and we often focus our attention on the details of their death. John would convey the message. Remember the good times, the laughter, the joy you shared. That's what they want from you. And also to let you know that now, while they are in the spirit world, they are still nearby, they still love you, and that they are okay. John was an amazing person, an amazing friend, who I always love to talk about. If you're interested and want to share your stories about John, I am always willing to revel in John's many and diverse accomplishments. His life and stories continue to inspire and enlighten me to the seen and unseen. I will always be grateful to John. May his memory always be a blessing to all who knew him. Thank you very much for attending today. I know it would mean a tremendous amount to John, knowing that you're here. Thank you very much. And now, Rachel. So Rachel's going to read a statement from our rabbi, who was also John's rabbi for the past 15 years at Sinai Synagogue.
Okay. Yeah, so this is on behalf of Rabbi Friedland. And he wrote this during a Torah portion called Lech Lecha, which is in Genesis. And so it's about John, but also about that Torah portion. The Lord said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." There is no introduction to this call. There is no description of who Abraham is and what he believes, or why, of all the people in the world, God chose Abraham. And the remarkable part of the story is that Abraham listens and follows through. You hear an incorporeal voice with a message that demands you upend your life that you know, and you just follow it. Yet Abraham does, and as they say, the rest is history. It's appropriate to remember our beloved John Roncz this Shabbat, today's Shabbat, of Abraham's call, because John also perceived things that many of us had a hard time understanding. Like Judy Cooperman, I was always a skeptic about John's readings, until he did a reading for Ben Herman, our rabbinic intern, with whom he was very close. He told Ben that he was seeing Ben's grandfather and his grandfather's brother. Ben told John that this could not be correct, for his grandfather was an only child, but John insisted. "Well, I am picking someone up," John said. "His name begins with an S, and he is your grandfather's brother." The reading ended, and later that night, Ben told his parents of that experience and how John got the information all wrong. And he said, "Grandpa had a brother." Ben's father responded, "Well, yes, indeed he did have a brother, but the brother died in infancy." Ben was shocked. "And what was his brother's name?" "Sam," said his father. Now you can't guess this stuff. How did John know? Clearly, John had an extrasensory or super-rational ability to see things. What was so refreshing about John was he insisted we all had that ability. We just needed to concentrate and develop it. The one consistency in John's experiences with the spirit world was love. John made it so clear whenever he spoke of the spirit world that it was a space in which love overwhelmed. Past grievances and jealousies dissipated. In his book, An Engineer's Guide to the Spirit World, you can get it on Amazon. Rabbi didn't say that was mine. In his book, An Engineer's Guide to the Spirit World, he tells the story of a grieving mother who came to him after her daughter was brutally murdered. He told me this story. This is me also talking. And she was brutally murdered. It was horrible. In making contact with the daughter, he brought the message. I remember John telling me this story a few times. That's why it's like, oh man. So in making contact with the daughter, he brought the message to her mother that she never suffered as she died. She must have just left before she actually died, and shared memories of moments of joy with her mother in the daughter's life. The mother at first resisted. Her daughter wasn't a cheerleader. She didn't remember any train trip with her daughter. But John would reveal details he was picking up from the daughter, which the mother then remembered as correct. I remember it was like a pair of red shoes, and she remembered it because the daughter used to take her favorite pair of red shoes and dance, you know. Anyway, that's not in here, but that's what he told me some of the specifics. As the session came to a close, John looked at the woman, the mother of this daughter, and said to her, "When you think of your daughter, you think of how she died. Your daughter just spent an hour reminding you of how she lived. That is how she wants you to remember her." John's messages from the spirit world were messages that restored our faith and compassion and family connectedness. When Rabbi's father died, John told Lizzie, Rabbi's wife, that a woman called Lambie was welcoming the Rabbi's dad to the other world. He says that my dad, when he was younger, called his only sister who preceded him in death, Lambie Pie. There's no way John could have known that, by the way, because I didn't even know this story at all. There are numerous midrashim, which are stories that do try to fill in and explain why Abraham was chosen by God. Many of them focus on Abraham's coming to believe in one God all on his own and getting in trouble with his native community for being different. John came to his profession in aerodynamics on his own. After looking into the priesthood, then trying law school because of his father insisted, John, who always loved planes and learned to fly one, began to study how planes fly. This led him to meet a professor at Ohio State who mentored him and directed him to other books and studies. John was the classic autodidact. His knowledge of aerodynamics and wing shear led him to work on a number of planes that ended up in the Smithsonian. His skill translated also to sailing ships and race cars as well. He designed a wing called the Catamaran, which successfully defended the America's Cup in 1988 and a WSC championship race car. He received numerous accolades for his work. Purdue University honored him as an Old Master, Medal of Achievement from Sailing World magazine, the Professor August Respite Award, the Milwaukee School of Engineering Gold Medal, and the Prince's Australian Medal from His Royal Highness Prince Philip for his designs. Spiritually, John was an iconoclast as well. Not just his studies in spiritualism, which is a recognized religion in England, but after befriending Rabbi Alan Cooperman of blessed memory here at Sinai, that was Sinai Synagogue, that's where we belong, he began his studies for conversion to Judaism, a far cry from his days in Catholic seminary. John liked to analogize his belief in God and Judaism's understanding of God to scientific theories. He wrote, "God is like the electricity in your wall outlets. It will power all kinds of devices, but it makes no judgment about how you use that power." Then he continued, "So why choose one religious approach over others? Why do I bother to drive an hour every day to attend the afternoon services at my synagogue? Why do I refuse to eat pork and keep other Jewish traditions? If God is not keeping score, why bother? I choose to do these things because I want to remind myself that I am a soul having a human experiences." And this is John speaking. "I am spirit, and in doing these things, I honor that spirit. It's about me, remembering who I am, rather than fearing some kind of divine punishment or expecting divine applause." End quote. After Rabbi Cooperman and his family moved to Israel, and then Rabbi Cooperman died suddenly of illness, John became detached from our synagogue. Rabbi Friedland first met John when he first came to Sinai. And Eileen Burke, who kept Sinai's memories within her, told me, "You need to reach out to John Roncz." This is Rabbi. She's telling Rabbi Friedland, "You need to reach out to John Roncz. He's a remarkable person. He should come back to Sinai." Soon after Ruby Gould passed away, John had been close to Ruby and came for the funeral. They met, the rabbi and John met and had coffee, and the rabbi encouraged John to return. How grateful we all are that he did return. John had a beautiful voice, and his davening, which is his prayer, praying, was magical. It truly was. He read Torah almost flawlessly, and Haftorah, which, I don't know, you guys don't know, but it's really not easy to read Torah. It's a big challenge. And Haftorah. He played the piano for us on our short-lived Friday Night Live series, and he wrote a melody that we sing to this day during our preparatory service. And John was a wonderful friend. He took many people under his wing and gave them encouragement, and he did that with the rabbi's kids. The last months of John's life were emotionally difficult. It is the challenge of a cancer diagnosis. The ups and downs of the journey are hard. Good news, bad news, followed by maybe good news, then a recognition that nothing else can be done. The rabbi went to visit John a week or two before he died, and it was when his good friend Jack was visiting from Holland. Was visiting from Holland. John was outside. It was a glorious day. I think he was smoking. I was there. No judgment. Okay. No judgment, but no judgment. And the rabbi asked how he was doing and what he was thinking, knowing that he would soon be going over to the spirit side. And John said, "I feel so much love. I am so grateful." Just as he told the mother of the murdered young girl at this near-death moment, John was celebrating the life he was allowed to live. He closed his book, writing, quote, "On this journey, I've experienced the bliss of love and the horror of loss. I've met hundreds of people who are living in another plane existence. I hope that in sharing my experiences, we have come to understand these truths. You are immortal, the spirit world is very real, and love never dies. And then he closed with a poem he found in a Jewish prayer book. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing. To love what death has touched. John's life was filled with love, both receiving and giving. He was a holy thing, and his life was a blessing to all of us. Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, there's a rest.
Excuse me, Dustin. We're Pat and Karen McPeak, and we're from Ohio. And John was our best man at our wedding.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we have to go.
And we got a picture.
Do you guys want to talk about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to hear the
So,
story.
John and I, sure, I'm a hand.
Thank you.
John and I were in the seminary together at Notre Dame for 5 years, and he was one of my best friends. And after we had both left the seminary, he and I hung out quite a bit, and he was one of the, there's a saying in the movie Harvey where Jimmy Stewart says, you can always be oh so clever or oh so kind, and I choose kind. But what he didn't know John Roncz. John Roncz was both of those. So, and I remember, and he was the best man at our wedding 50 years ago. And a couple of years after we were married, my mother died in California, and I told John about it. I said, I'm going to fly out there, and he said, what about your wife? And we had 2 little babies, and I said, I can't afford to do that. And he said, I'll pay for it. So, anyway, there's a million stories like that. And so we have been in touch, John and I. I'm a writer, and he has always encouraged my writing and always gives me good reviews. And unfortunately, he's not going to be able to read my next novel, but he really liked my first one, and he's always been a great friend. The last time we saw him was in 2019, and then COVID happened and we couldn't visit him anymore. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Unfortunately, we have other commitments, and
That's Patrick O'Keefe, and I'm Karen O'Keefe, and a little short thing, I was real impressed with John because he was a good friend, and my brother was a seminarian as well. All 3 of them.
yeah, the 3 of us were all seminarians.
But they all left the seminary, but had families or whatever. But so John, I remember when I was dating Pat, John would invite us over, and he would perform Chopin for us.
Oh yeah, he had that big Steinway, and he would. It was unbelievable.
He would give us some wine and stuff, and we'd be listening to this great music.
I mean, it was like listening to Horowitz or somebody.
Oh my gosh,
I mean,
he was so good.
he was so good on that piano.
Yeah. So
Well, we don't want to interrupt.
well,
We really have to go
I just
too.
want to say thanks for inviting us, and that's very moving. Dustin, your stories and everybody's stories, and
Yeah.
thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Is his sister Mary Beth here?
Very good.
Mary Beth isn't here.
Oh, she's not, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't seen her in 50 years. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Oh,
It's on Amazon.
I just have to say, that little power outage, the power has never gone out here. It's underground, it's not up there. And I knew John was going to pull something today, but I didn't expect that. So.
Red Bird wasn't here, so we had to do that.
That's right, he had to do something, it was going to be dramatic. And I knew it was going to be something that we would know it was him. And I think that was his little, hello guys, I'm here. So anyway, I have something here from Notre Dame. The Aerospace and Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Notre Dame has provided the following statement that can be read at the memorial service for John Roncz. John Roncz graduated from Notre Dame with a degree in the liberal arts. He could speak many languages and play the piano and became a self-trained aeronautical engineer. He was a key figure in the development of many of Burt Rutan's revolutionary aircraft, including the Voyager, the airplane that flew nonstop around the world in 1986. He was invited to give a seminar to the Aerospace Engineering program at Notre Dame in 2020, where he related that after reading the classic text, Theory of Wing Sections by Abbott, he decided he could design a better propeller than the commercial designs that were available at the time. Before we knew that he was an ND alum, he was known as John Roncz, who designed a better airfoil than Burt Rutan. During the development of the Rutan Voyager, Roncz tested the airfoils and propellers he designed at Ohio State. We are saddened by his passing, but grateful for his connection to Notre Dame and the contributions to aeronautical design from Notre Dame. So I just have a couple of quick stories from his mediumship nights here. And one of them, he's standing there and he's saying, somebody just parachuted in. And he was like, what? They just came in on a parachute. And this woman said, oh, that's my husband. He was a parachuter during the war, and it was their anniversary. Oh. And he came to say hi, and she was there. So, you know, that was really sweet. The other one was more serious. This man came through. He was from South Bend, but he'd been in the military. And he had been decorated with the Medal of Honor, which is the highest medal you can receive. He was very proud of this, very proud of this. And his military service, it meant everything to him. Well, it turned out that some people in his division decided they were jealous, or I don't know what their deal was, but they decided that they didn't think this was right that he got this honor because he wasn't even at the battle that he got the honor for. And so they did this whole campaign, and the military took the medal back, and it devastated this man, devastated him. And he committed suicide. He had a wife and 3 children. And he came through one night and he said, I have a message for everyone here. And the message was, pride. Do not let pride overtake you. He said, that was the thing I couldn't get past, was my pride, that I lost my good name. And he said, I realize now that that was not the right way to view it. And he said he came through with this message for everybody there. And John was able to pull that out. And so that was the kind of things we got from him when he came and he did these readings. So.
I need to stand up. Debbie needs to stand up first herself. You don't send me.
question you did.
Well, I'm reading a tribute from a woman that John met in Hawaii. Her name is Carol Hart. I first heard John while participating in the American Soviet, which I'd never heard before, balloon venture, later known as Earth Winds. So this is kind of new to me. But this project was the first attempt to circumnavigate the world and nonstop in a helium balloon. During this adventure, which began in earnest in 1989, many were attracted to this amazing and seemingly impossible feat, including some of the top engineers involved in flight in our atmosphere as well as beyond. John was spoken of as a legend for his many accomplishments, including his innovative foil and wing designs for aircraft and high-tech sailboats. It was not until he came to visit us in Kauai that I finally met the man in person. I knew he was my friend. The moment I saw him, his kindness and love were palpable. And when he told me of his great love for Louis, he had already recently and tragically lost, I was moved to tears for both of them. He made me aware of the terrible prejudice, judgment, that was a result of them just loving one another, and the pain that John endured in trying to help put Louis to rest. I was just beginning to explore my spiritual path at this time, and I was fascinated by John's ability to see and hear across the veil, and I so admired that he used this gift to help others reconnect with their loved ones. We remained in contact with each other from the very first encounter. I'll never forget when he brought Dustin to Kauai. I arranged for all of us to have sessions with them both. John mentored, and he was a good friend who helped Dustin to become the amazing human being that he is today. And I'm privileged to call him my friend as well. John was and continues to be a bridge between all of us who remain in this 3D existence so well as with those who have crossed the veil. I know you're here with us now, John. Mahalo. And loa, nui loa, sorry, to you, my friend. Hui lo, I can't do this very well, so forgive me. Ahawi hua malawa pono. Until we meet again, take good care. Love, Carol Hart. And I thought, what a neat story, isn't it?
Carol owned a Lomi massage school on the island of Kauai. And he took us there, and Carol and Don took us out on the sea, the ocean. I mean, it was amazing.
When you meet people like that, there's just that connection, and it remains from here to there. Thank you.
Oh, this.
Oh, we did this one too? Okay. Oh, my personal one?
And your personal.
And this one too?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll do this
You have
first.
2 more. Back on stage here. This is from the Gay Men's Course of Washington, D.C. Here's a tribute that we would love to have you include in the celebration on January 6th. We have added John's name to the memoriam page in our concert programs and alumni Facebook pages. Rob Neighbors' reflections capture what our lifelong members want to say. It'll be tough to not pick up the phone and chat with you, John Roncz. Okay, got it. I appreciated your friendship and your advice. I'll miss you terribly, but I know I'll see you again. Can you give me some strength here? Rest in power, John. Know that you changed the world. For those who don't know John, he was this I have a hard time with that word, aerodynamicist beyond Voyager
behind Voyage, Starship One, Virgin, GlobalFlyer, Eclipse, the War Replica, P-51, oh my, all these words, okay. Windecker, Eagle, the AMSOL Racer, I should have read this earlier, the Boeing, and a sonic cruiser proposal, and probably the 787 wing. In the glider community, his Genesis glider wiped out the competition. John heard the GMCW perform Naked Man with his indie chorus in 1987, or 97, excuse me. He wept uncontrollably and promptly joined the GMCW, flying in each week for rehearsals from South Bend, which we had heard earlier. So he could go with them on a European tour. He was a great pianist, and he had a great tenor voice, excuse me. And in aviation circles, I'll say that John had flown west. And this is from Rob Napier. And I think there's a little bit more here. Oh, this is to you. Yeah, I can read that. So anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about him. Little does anybody know, but he and I dated. Oh. So I wanted to share that with you. One of his favorite places was, of course, where you saw the pancake and the sausage. We would go to the pancake house. We would go to a lot of different places. And he'd been to my home and had dinner with me and my husband many times, too. So it's not, I wasn't cheating, okay? And anyway, he had said, I'm going to take you out to dinner, Marge, and I'll pick you up Monday night, or whatever that was, at 7. And I said, okay, great. Included it with my husband, as I always did. And I waited. Finally, 8 o'clock, I called him, and he said, oh, my God, I forgot. Oh, Marge, I'm so sorry. And I said, that's okay. And he said, can I pick you up tomorrow night? And I said, yeah, it's okay. Sure, good. Well, my husband went, I went in the other room and told my husband, I said, boy, he's not coming. And he said, what? And my husband said, if he wants, you tell him, if he wants to date you, he better not stand you up. So I thought that was such a good, but we did many times go out to dinner in a lot of different places, and we had a good time wherever we went. He was just a wonderful friend of mine. And I saw him once on a personal, just an individual, and he told me that there was this fellow coming through. He had white on, looked like a white uniform. I thought, oh, okay. And he said, he's got something for you. His name is Lowell Barsness. And I said, what? This was my first love, who went to Vietnam and didn't come back. And he said, and he's bringing something to you. And I thought, what? He opened it up, so to speak, and he said, it's an engagement ring. I thought, who can make that up? Nobody knows. Who knows a Lowell anyway? I'm just saying, And this is from way back when I was a kid. So I'm just telling you, he was a great man. And he was so good to everybody I knew. And here too, he was just always so good, kind. And when he gave a message, he always did it with discernment. Maybe if somebody was a little angry on the other side still, he didn't come through that way. And I think that's a real blessing. These people, I introduced him to so many of my friends. And my husband loved him too. So I'm just saying thank you very much. It was for putting up with my tears. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm reading the last statement. And the last statement is from a very famous medium by the name of John Holland. So when John Holland became accredited with the FFF, I reached out to him and I asked him if he'd like to say a few words on behalf of John, and he said yes. And he also said, please don't give out this email to anybody because I don't want 1 million people emailing me. He said, this is my private email. I said, don't worry, you're in safe hands. I said, don't. John said, Bob from FFF, the director for Forever Family Foundation, forwarded your email and I'm very sad to hear about John. I know you asked me if I wanted to write something, but to be honest, it's been many years since he and I have met, but I do remember a couple things. I still remember John and giving him a reading many years ago, the one on the cruise ship. I know he's one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. And I remember his kindness, the love for his family, and I believe he was an amazing caretaker for his mom, which he was. His mom also had Alzheimer's. I know he was very compassionate to those in need and always willing to lend a helping hand. I mostly remember his questions about the spirit world. And I believe the questions he asked is because of him being a very talented and methodological engineer. John wanted to know how things worked. Little did I know that this kind man would go on to do his own research and study of mediumship on his own and be a mentor to many, myself included. He no longer needs to design planes. He has his own wings now. Fly, John, fly. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, John Al. Thank you very much. A break? So we'll take a break. We'll take 10 minutes. And then we'll come back because there's bathrooms and stuff.
I eat a couple cookies. I baked them.
Better eat fast. We got 10 minutes. We got to power through this thing. We got videos. We got things. You guys can eat in here, can't they? Can't they eat in here? We'll be back in 10 minutes, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. You have to go. Oh, yeah. So we'll put you in there first, and then we'll go to the video. Oh my God. Yes. And then something's right.
I told you, David.
We're working on this. When I won the big jackpot, one of the first things I did was look for things.
Oh, that's yours.
Yeah. Oh, bells. I go to bells all the time. Yeah. They're garden. Oh, yeah. It's always babies. The first time I went, I was shocked because everyone's bringing their babies.
Right, exactly.
They all have, sun advisors for their babies. Which is good. Yeah. So this is interesting.
They'll be okay.
First memories of training. Yeah.
All the time.
That's actually nice.
It's going very well. I love hearing all these things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to find.
Yeah.
You can find really easily.
You always talk about it, so I always just felt
Do you still think that moment is just so
I'm sorry.
It's like really important to
I'm so sorry.
yeah, no, I'm planning for my retirement.
And I love seeing
Yeah, let's talk
stories.
about it.
There's a book over there.
I love
You
it.
can get water candles. You can look it up.
I take a picture of it.
I like that.
This is us parasailing together in the movie. That's the water boats. It's cute.
I'm actually seeing Ben and Aaron somebody. Oh my god, tell us to hi. I will. I mean, they're going.
Jesus, I should really try to come back here more often than I do.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame you for staying at Chicago.
I mean, there is a tad more to do there.
Yeah, just that.
One or two things.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
I was getting so
tired.
thirsty. I know.
I was like,
Yes.
Yes. Place to stay. Cousins all live there, so.
I'm not from stress and time. I've been stressed all day. This is what Dustin has always had an effect on me.
Yes.
I love being his friend, but Dustin has stressed me out on day one. Because he just hides me.
You know why? Because he is so just go with the
Yes,
flow.
he
There
is.
is no time schedule. If we get
It's
there, we
supposed
get
to-
there.
You're supposed to hang out with for an hour, you know, not be hours with them.
It's so, and we're so like.
Oh, I know. I'm aware.
So it's
Yes,
very,
you
it's
are.
very
And
fast.
so is Charlie.
It's a very fast
Yes.
dynamic.
But so is Charlie. We're two of Dustin's closest friends.
Yes.
Because Charlie would agree with me. It's a stress that's addicting. Because that's why we get along so much. We're so different. And I do love being around him.
It's balanced.
But it's like enjoyable, but like if you never dull moment, never a dull day. My life would be duller without him.
Yeah.
But every moment with him is stressful. Yeah, you asked me to speak last minute. Okay. Well, you heard to speak last minute. knew it.
You just did not seem like an alcoholic in front of your mother.
That's really what it was. I know, but then if I hadn't right now, I took the edge off, I'd be fine.
Oh yeah, it's only better now.
I mean, if we had time to actually stop before we go to the train, I think I might get something for it to go cup to drink on the train.
I'm going to the cellar tonight.
To relax. That's not, I'm not joking. Oh my god, it's my train. 5 something? What time is it here?
It's 20 minutes away.
Okay, so I can show. It's almost.
You got it's
Alright.
like 4 o'clock.
Yes. I would think the latest we could get out of here would be 5.
Well,
A little earlier if we have to stop so you can.
Drink wine, get off, for real. But then I guess now, since you've also and my mother, love her, and she didn't mean to stress me out, but you know, it's yeah, I was like, so by the way, grandfather's not doing well. And I'm like, well, that's triggering because the last time somebody told me someone wasn't doing well, actually going to see them, and, you know, I'm at their service and I had to say goodbye. So now all I'm going to think about for the next week is I gotta get back and save my grandma.
Why don't you just call your grandmother and have a conversation?
He can't get on the phone.
Not your grandmother. Talk to her.
And that, what does
Grandma
it have to do with saying my grandma?
No, but just call her and have a conversation.
I stay in Chicago.
Yeah, call and have a conversation. And that you can read a conversation. And that
You know,
conversation will tell you.
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
Let me know when you're in town.
Let us know if you have any
Yes.
further.
You're meeting one of my sisters in Lincoln.
Oh, God. Sorry, we're just having a meltdown.
No, it's fine. You're organic.
I know. Well, I'm gonna have one bathroom so I can do this. Alright, I feel good though. Got that out of my system. Charlie, when I say that being best friend with husband comes with a daily stress that is addicting. Do you know what I kind of like involved in? Okay. Thank you for coming.
I'll have to come over and see you guys. Yes, I'd love to see the house.
Yeah, are you mad? Yeah, we just yes. All right.
Take care. Oh yeah, I feel better. Alrighty, everybody, we're coming close. There's people commenting on the live stream. You did a great job. It's good to know more about John. I only met him once or twice. God bless him. John, you are a true friend. Fly high, my brother, and we have so many memories. Love from Belgium. People are all over the world watching this. Are you guys leaving? Okay. I'm just reading some of the comments. People are commenting from all over. expendable.
That was amazing. These are lemon angel cookies, and there's another lemon.
Such a That's just like him. You're 30? Yeah, these comments are not great. She wants to live on her God. I think I saw her once when she was. That was a long time.
You don't even know what a long time.
That's probably true. But I'm here.
Dr. Library.
Oh, I know, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Is this thing on?
It's on.
Oh, okay. I feel like I'm giving a presentation. This feels like, anyone else felt like that when they were up here? Felt like school? Alright, so here's my presentation. Okay, so I'm Jared. I'm friends with Dustin. I'm just gonna go through this real quick, just my own, how John touched my life. So, okay. So I first met John when Dustin and I were beginning our friendship. Now we've had friends for a long time now, and a very good friendship. I have longer than 10 years, time does fly. As we were beginning our friendship, Dustin invited me over to his and John's place to hang out one night and explained that he lived with an older gay man, but that he wasn't just his roommate, but also his mentor and his life coach and his friend. And at that time, I had never even met an older gay man, which I learned they don't like to be called an older gay man, they like to be called eternally 29. I was newly out myself and still becoming acquainted with my new community, so naturally most of my knowledge and understanding came from stereotypes. What I knew of older gay men was that they were likely creepy, kind of bitter, mean, and really loved Barbara Streisand and Judy Garland. So I was wary to meet John initially. I have never in my life been so grateful though to have been proven wrong about a stereotype. Instead of bitter and mean, I was greeted with a friendly hello, a warm smile, a big hug, and a boisterous laugh. John and I became fast friends and would talk and laugh for hours about RuPaul's Drag Race, aviation stories from his past, the gay community at large, aka mostly boys, and his stories and adventures of his past. Our favorite thing to do was to go to Red Lobster together. Boy, did we love cheddar baked biscuits. One of my fondest memories was after one of our many lunches at Red Lobster. The waiter brought the check and John looked at me and said, "Jared, I forgot my wallet." And I literally said, "John, I don't like to do dishes." And we just started laughing and laughing. Fortunately, I was just enough to cover the bill and a tip. I was also a broke college kid. But to this day, I'll never forget just the, I don't have my wallet and I don't want to do dishes. And, yeah. Even though we had many great times together, John was also a supportive friend, and they're in hard times too. The summer after my first semester at IU, I lived with John and Dustin. I was serving at a bar and worked crazy hours, and ended up getting pretty sick and needed a surgery. John took care of me while I recovered. He coined himself my Jewish mother, and that he was going to make sure that I got better, or God willing. He reminded me to take my meds and cooked for me his famous chicken paprikash and chicken noodle soup, even though it was July. John also acted as a mentor and would have tough conversations with me, and he would ask me hard questions. I was a 21-year-old fiery kid who felt the world owed me a lot because I had been hurt a lot. And at times, or at that time, I was on rough terms with my mom.
who had been my best friend throughout childhood. I was angry, full of hurt, didn't want to listen to anybody. John would talk with me and challenge me to do self-work and heal from this trauma. I'll never forget how one day he's like, you know what we should do? We should do something nice for your mom. And I literally was like, why? Knowing our circumstance and how I felt, he was like, no, we really should do something nice for your mom. So reluctantly, he convinced me that we would do something easy and something nice. We went out and bought her beautiful yellow flowers to hang from her porch, which she loved, and it felt good to know that she loved them. He taught me that compromise and kindness can heal. And that is what happened. My mom and I did heal, and we made amends and are close again. My Jewish mother brought my mom back to me. I'll always be grateful to John, and I'll always be thankful for the love and the life lessons and the kindness that he showed me. I'll see him in yellow flowers, I'll see him in chicken paprikash and cheddar bean biscuits. Though I didn't get to say goodbye, I'll never stop saying thank you.
Thank you, Jared. That was beautiful. Yeah, Jared lived with us for a summer. That was a beautiful time. So at this point, we're gonna move into the videos. And then we have a few more speakers who wanna come up and share. And then we're gonna close the service with some of my stories and John's stories about us, that we're very close to him. I'm going to share that story towards the end. And then we'll open it up to anybody who wants to speak. So let's shift to the videos. Let's see if I can move this. I don't know if the screen can be shown. That's pretty good. Then we'll start. Ooh, let me try this. I'm going to introduce people. So the first video, okay. So the first video is going to be from Ben Herman, and this was one of John's interns at Sinai Synagogue. That's right, he was at the synagogue for the internship. And so he's got a few things to say.
Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Ben Herman, currently at Mosaic Law Congregation in Sacramento. And I want to thank Dustin Livers for giving me the opportunity to share some words about my dear friend, John Roncz. John was a major influence in my life. I met him when I was doing an internship at Sinai Synagogue, his synagogue in South Bend, and instantly took a liking to John. He almost taught me how to drive stick shift. Had a lot of patience, but it didn't quite work. We had gourmet dinners at his home in Elkhart, and he introduced me to the concept of mediumship. I was a rationalist at that time, and I accused John of being a necromancer, and he said, I'm not a necromancer. I don't summon anyone. They come to me. And I remember one night after a beautiful Italian dinner at his home on the patio that he gave me an option. He gave me the option of having an analysis done or an encounter with the spirits. And I had chosen the analysis, which basically was I was too much in my head when a spirit came forth. And it was my dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, with whom we had a family feud. And the encounter was profound in a number of ways. One, John got correct that he had a white handkerchief with a red M on it for Murray. Second was him serving in the Korean War, the images of the wounded soldiers he was treating as a physician. But then third, the most profound, which is in John's book, An Engineer's Guide to the Spirit World, is when he was talking about someone in the family whose name began with the letter S. And I said, aha! There is no one in my family with a name that began with the letter S. You chose that because that was the most common letter. I called my dad later that day, and he says to me, your grandfather, Murray, had a brother, Saul. And I got goosebumps. This led me on the path of becoming more of a spiritualist, recognizing that there are things out there we don't understand, and that our goal is to bring comfort to others. John brought comfort to me a number of times, and I'll just mention one of them. I was having a dispute with my wife as to whether or not to move to Miami or Buffalo. I've been offered both jobs. Options is generally good, but not for my personality, not for someone who's too much in their head. And I was grappling with it. I knew that Miami was better for my wife, and I also knew that Buffalo was a better congregation, more stable, more of a chance of long-term success. And I was going to tell my wife, Karina, I'm going to Buffalo with or without you. But before I did that, I left home and I called John. And I said the situation to John, I was explaining, and John said to me, to ask someone to live in a specific place, that's a big ask. And I said, but John, she doesn't see this as a better job, better financial. And he said again, I don't know, Ben. You're telling someone where they need to live. And I ultimately decided Miami, knowing I'd have to move on from there most likely. But it was the right move. It greatly improved my marriage. And it set me up for a course of success where I am now in Sacramento. And I have to thank John for that. He had amazing insights. His clairvoyance was something that was off the charts, at least in my experience. And while he could not directly tell me things because the future is yet to be determined, I have found on more than one occasion his insights about my professional life and my personal life have been spot on and have led me to choose good decisions. John, I miss you. I miss being able to call you for advice and to hear how you're doing, to hear about your cruise with Dustin, to hear the stories about Luis, to hear about your going out of your way to get kosher nori, to make sushi at Sinai Synagogue. I miss your warmth, your kindness. I miss your saying what needed to be said, even if I wasn't able to hear it. Your memory is for me forever a blessing. You live on in my heart. I am so blessed that we had the opportunity to connect and to speak over these years. And I know that on the other side, you are doing well. Your calming presence is helping others. You are doing what you set out to do, making people's lives better. taking away the feelings of guilt from tragedies, and ultimately helping make our world a better place. Shalom chaver. Goodbye, friend.
That was Ben Herman. The next one we'll hear from is Colin Bates. We'll play that in a moment here. It's people who are leaving that I want to say goodbye to. Oh, I'm talking to the live stream. I'll be right back and say bye. So the next video we have is from Colin Bates. He's a very famous and well-known minister at the Arthur Findlay College, the world's foremost institution for psychic science and mediumship that John would study at many, many years in his life. And so Colin was so gracious to actually make a video for us. Thank you, Colin. We'll play it.
Hello, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It gives me great pleasure today to be here with each and every one of you, to be part of this wonderful tribute to our dear friend, John Roncz. My name is Minister Colin Bates, and on behalf of the Arthur Findlay College and the Spiritualist National Union, I am honoured to speak today for John for his memorial. And John was a very dear friend of mine for many years. Time passes so quickly. I was trying to recall my first meeting with John. It was at the Arthur Findlay College on one of his first visits. And during the private reading, we were able to connect to John's partner, Lewis. Lewis demonstrated his love through the evidence of spirit communication. During his stay at the college, John was in my teaching group. His wonderful humour and natural spirituality shone through. In one of our many conversations, John spoke of his home in America and also of Hawaii, where the ashes of Louis are interred. Through our friendship, John invited me to visit his home in America and to travel to Hawaii. I believe that was in 2010. That time still remains one of the most memorable experiences within my life. John's generosity of spirit made the whole thing possible, and I was fortunate to meet many of the people who knew and loved him. In Hawaii, we visited all the sacred sites together and went to the beautiful temple where the ashes of Louis were placed. I know that John will rest beside the love of his life. John's gift of healing and mediumship, together with the compassion within his heart, were quite extraordinary. He had this amazing ability just to smile with a twinkle in his eye and just reach for the spirit world, and then he was there, communicating away with all those within the spirit world. It was indeed an honour to know him and to spend time with him. I believe in total I was in America and Hawaii for 6 weeks. It was at the time when the volcano in Iceland created the ash cloud, so I actually stayed even longer than I anticipated. And I had the opportunity to watch him work, not just as a medium, but his extraordinary knowledge in his field to do with his aeronautical engineering. And I would sit by him and watch him with his computers and watch how he would work incredibly to see all the aerodynamics of everything he was created. And then all of a sudden he would stop, he would turn to me, he would start laughing, and we'd have another conversation to do with mediumship. It was, and indeed still is, an incredible part of my life to have known him and to have shared that time. So on behalf of all the tutors at the college, the Arthur Findlay College, who knew him and shared time with him, we wish him well on his next stage of evolution within the spirit world, having known that he will meet up once more with the true love of his life. Such an honour to have been part of his journey. John, we wish you well, and travel high, soar high, and be with your love. God bless you, my friend. Hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.
Wasn't that lovely? Love Colin. So we have just a couple more videos. The next one is going to be from Rob Neighbor, and Rob Neighbor is the one who wrote on behalf of the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C., that John would fly out every weekend to do a rehearsal with. And he's also a very long-time friend of John and has known him for over 30 years.
Hey everyone, I'm Rob Neighbor. I'm a retired airline pilot that's known John for maybe 30, 35 years. Actually, I first met John in Washington, D.C. shortly after I moved there. There was a march on Washington, and John and Andy were riding the metro train into town. He was wearing a shirt that had his design airplane on it, but the vortices left by the airplane were rainbow colored. And so that was a dead giveaway that he was there for the March on Washington that weekend. So I looked at his shirt and I said, hey, cool shirt, nice canard design. He says, thank you, I did that design. And I said, well, that makes you either John Roncz or Burger Town. And his eyes lit up and he says, I'm John Roncz. And I says, I love you. And he started laughing. He says, I can't believe you know me. And he said, not many people know my name. And I said, well, you know, I've been around for a while, I've heard of you. And I said, I'm awful proud of the fact that to discover that you're a member of our family, shall we say. Anyway. I dragged him off to the Gay Pilots Association banquet that night, and that was really rewarding. He had a lot of fun. And later on, he drove up to Indianapolis to see my DC-based Gay Men's Chorus sing a joint concert with the Indianapolis chorus there called Naked Man, which was almost an opera, a song cycle about the trials and tribulations and tragedies that gay and lesbian people have been through in the last 30 years. It was very poignant, lots of weeping in the audience and things like that, and John was beside himself with his appreciation for the concert. So we decided to join the chorus when we were taking the same show over to Europe. So we did a tour of Scandinavia in 1998, and John flew in to Washington, D.C. pretty much every weekend and did rehearsals with us so we could go. Bought himself a tux and hung out with us and just had a wonderful time. And if you didn't know, John was a tenor one. So there it is. A wonderful man. I spent, 10 years in a row going to Hawaii with him, over to Kauai and Poipu Beach. And I was over there in Oahu when he was buying a creche at the Temple Byodo-In for him and Louis. And here's hoping I get a chance to be there when his ashes are interred over there. I'm sure each one of us has a different experience with John. For some of us it's deeply personal, for some of us it's family, for some of us it's friends. But I think we all miss him, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this memorial now. And I miss him terribly. He was a dear friend. And I'm glad I got to see him this year before he passed. The good news is I'll get to see him again. Thanks for listening, and I apologize again for not being there. Take care, and as John would say, aloha.
I love that one. because he's in an airport. So I love how he's literally recording this video about John and his planes, and he's in an airport, you know, ready to board a plane to fly away. Rob's great. We've been in contact ever since his departure, so Rob and I have been talking a lot about things. So we have one last video. Well, it's actually not a video, it's a voice recording, and it's from Yak. And so Yak was one of John's proteges in engineering, and Yak and I are also friends, and so it's kind of funny because I was John's student in spirituality and mediumship, and Yak was John's student in a very different way in planes and engineering. So Yak wanted to have us have a voice reading today.
Hello everyone, I'm very sorry I couldn't be here today, but I'm glad I was able to record a message and talk about John. I first met John on a job interview after visiting Oshkosh AirVenture a couple of years ago. At the time, John's name was already very well established in the aviation world, and even long before then, he was widely recognized for all his achievements. In fact, most people would tell me that the AirVenture I attended in itself was one of his claims to fame. John would present there yearly and had the place so packed that it had people waiting outside. I'm not really the right person to honor those achievements, the ones that happened a while ago, because when I first met John, I was simply a fresh out of university student from another continent, and to be fully honest, I had hardly heard of him. When I arrived, one of John's first questions to me was, I vividly remember, he asked, is the Dutch government open about UFOs? Of course, I had no idea how to respond to that. I thought, this guy might be crazy. But really, over the weekend, I learned that this is John's way to crack open a conversation. I think John wanted to see if I had any interest discussing anything outside of aerodynamics. Probably more accurate would be to say, to see if I had any interest to talk about how the world or how the supernatural works. I think John really liked these conversations. They require a certain sense of creativity. And I think John probably liked creativity more, or regarded creativity more as more important than anything else. Over the past 6 years, John continued to work together. We've done many projects together, mostly aerodynamics. This allowed us to share ideas really on a daily basis. And what John impressed me most by is not just his knowledge of aerodynamics, which is obviously spot on, but rather I was impressed by his attitude towards life itself. On many occasions, John would revert back to one of his quote-unquote life mottos. These were basically small summaries of his previous experiences. Usually they were very funny and written in a funny and insightful way, so much so that I started to write a lot of them down. I think over the years I've collected maybe 20 or so of them, and I'd like to share one with you today. This is probably the one that helped me the most, and it goes as follows. You do the best you can, and you disconnect from the outcome. What it means is that you can easily accept the potential for failure by having done your best. That's really all you have to do. There's no need to stress anymore about the outcome at all. You can be by the idea that you did your best. It's really quite a humble role, and at first didn't seem to make so much sense to me, and for someone like John to live by that. But after spending much time with him, I've come to think it's the reverse, that this humble role might be a requirement to being brilliant. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. I'm not tuning out. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. When John passed away, I lost a mentor and a very good friend. I used to call John every day, and now I'm left with a half-hour hole in my evenings. I miss you, John. Thank you.
Yak and John were also very, very close. I'm sure you could hear that in the audio. And there's actually some very funny stories about John and Yak, because when John first met Yak, he had a crush on Yak. Yak has a wife and a baby, and when John was on a lot of drugs towards the end of his life, he said to Yak, "I wish I could have had your baby." And I don't know if, I think it was the drugs. But that was a story that Yak and I would share, and other people too, that was very, very funny. So at this point, we're done with the videos. So we have the statements, the videos, and then I'd like to share some of our stories. So we talked a little bit about how we met, and the three of us, but I haven't talked about the meaningful moments that John and I actually really had together. That's going to be very, very difficult. So my last visit with John was 2 weeks before he died. And I ordered Chipotle for the two of us. And I had brought all of my scrapbooks, all 5 of them. Volume 5 is over there, so you can see that. It's got volume 5 on it, doesn't it? You can see it.
Yes.
It does, yep. And I went through with John every single one of them, and we went through all of our travels and stories and every moment we ever had together that was meaningful, which are all in my scrapbooks. And at that day, John was very coherent. He was aware, he could engage with me, he was having a really good day that day. And I knew at this visit, a part of me knew that this was probably going to be the last. And it's very hard when someone you love, you know that it could be the last. And I had to put on a happy face. And I've done that a lot in my life, so I knew how to do it. And I put on my smile and my face like I know how to do. And I intentionally asked John to pick out 3 of your favorite stories that we had together. And he said, I think I know the 3. And so I want to share John's favorite stories of the two of us. One of his favorite stories were when we were at IU South Bend together. It was late at night, and I told John that there was some negative energy in one of the classrooms. I said, "No, John, listen." I said, no, you don't. I said, "It's really bad in there." I said, "I go to this class." It was abnormal psychology class. I think the professor may have been a little abnormal too. I don't know. But anyway, I went into this class, and every day, nobody was talking to each other. Everyone was just staring at their books. You could feel the tension and the anxiety in the air. Nobody was comfortable. Everyone was uncomfortable. The energy just sucked. It was awful. I was having anxiety in there. I was feeling it in my throat, my chest. I was like, this energy just sucks. And I was like, something needs to be done with this. So I went to John and I said, John, can we sneak into this classroom after hours and cleanse the energy? And he said, yes. So here comes John. He goes and he says, hold on, sweetheart, I have just a thing. He waddles over, because he was a big man, you know. So he's waddling over to his cabinet. He picks out a bag of sacred Hawaiian sea salt, which can only be gathered from the waters in Hawaii. They actually have to, and they put limits on how much everyone can get. So John had to really fight for this sacred salt, okay? So he pulls out this bag of this granulated pink salt. And I said, okay, hold on, I have something too. So I went off and I grabbed my sacred Tibetan bells. Because I knew I couldn't bring my sage because we were going to IU South Bend. I couldn't just have a bunch of, smoke in the air and, they'd be calling the fire department. So we sneak in there. It's probably 9:30 at night. And we're going into the room and he's like, look out for the janitors. I'm like, oh my God. So I go around the corner and I'm looking, he's looking, there's no janitors. The room happened to be unlocked. They don't lock the rooms at IUSB. Anyone can go in there. So we go into the room and we close the door and then turn on the lights and we start cleansing the room. He's putting his salt around the corners. He's sprinkling it along the walls. I've got my bells and I'm cleansing the energy in the space and we're both saying our prayers and we're going around. And he laughed. He looked at me and he laughed and he said, sweetheart, he said, they're going to think this is a drug deal. He said, they're going to see this old man with a bag of salt thinking it's like cocaine, and we're just snorting it up in the room. And, I just laughed and laughed. And we finished, and we went home. The next time I had class, I went into the space, and you could feel the energy shift. There was no heaviness. There was no anxiety. Students were talking to each other. They were speaking it. I thought to myself, does no one realize that, does no one have awareness that we're very different today than we were like the past 6 weeks? I felt like I was the only one that could see the changes in the room. And it never came back. We came home and I told him what had happened and he was very, very happy. He said, oh, I'm so glad that the energy worked out and it's all great. And that's one story that we'll never forget. It was one of his favorites. Another story was when we went to Belize together. So as Ben Herman was saying that John and I have gone on a lot of cruises. We have. We went on 6 cruises together. We would go every year. I was poor and John didn't have anyone to go with. So it was a great mix. So, and then I had a lot of anxiety. So I remember on our first cruise, I almost didn't get on the plane. I said, John, I don't know if I can do this. I'm literally breathing heavy. I'm like having a panic attack coming on. I said, I don't know. I was like breathing. He goes, sweetheart, just calm down. Just calm down. He literally was behind me. He waddled his way and he gets me behind the line and he's blocking me with his body. So I can't leave. And he's like, we're getting on this plane, So I said, okay. So I'm like, I'm breathing, I'm getting on, I'm like getting water, and I'm fighting, and I was okay. We get on the plane, and that was when we flew to our first cruise. We went all over, almost every island in the Bahamas, every island in the Caribbean. This trip was especially special because in Belize, that trip, and there's a photo over there, you can see it for those of you that are here. We went parasailing. Now, again, I have a lot of anxiety. So someone telling me that I'm gonna be hooked up to a wire way up in the sky, you know, where there's no footing, right? Your legs are dangling over the ocean. You know, my mind is thinking sharks. You know, if we come back down, I'm gonna hit a log and my leg's just gonna fly off. You know, I'm thinking worst case scenario all the way. John's like, sweetheart, we're gonna be fine, you know. I said, okay. So we get on this boat, we fly out. And that moment in the parasail, I remember just feeling this sense of freedom and just exhilaration and going in the air, all the anxiety dissipated, just this amazing moment with John. And in fact, he was more afraid than I was. Before we got up halfway, he's grabbing the things, and I'm still got my arms out, and I'm like flying in the air. When we got up there, we had a man, his name was Neil, and I asked him to use my phone to take a picture of us. And when he took the photo, you can see over there, there's a blue orb that appeared. And rays coming down, shining right on us in the blue orb. And John was wondering, you know, what is that? You know, what was that? And I said, well, we had a spiritual experience, you know. I said there was some connection there. I said, you know, it was this amazing time. And John loved that. John wasn't the kind of person that was going to travel by himself. He had his own challenges. I have anxiety, he had depression. So we actually complemented each other very well. Because I was afraid to go places, and John needed motivation to go places. So I was his motivation, and he was able to calm me down so we could get to places. So it worked really, really well. So when we went out there, we had great times together. We really did. That was one of the special times that he really enjoyed. His favorite memory, I would say probably his favorite was, and this probably isn't a big surprise to everybody, was our trip to Hawaii. And that's this photo right here. You guys can see. This was one of our first trips that we took together. And he wanted me to go to one place that was very special to him, to the island of Kauai, where we met Carol, who spoke today, and Don, who was very close friends of John, and their granddaughter, who was a model, who had a boy on the boat that was cutting up mangoes for us. He was a sushi chef. He was really good mangoes over there. But anyway, when we were sailing, we went to these very special mountains that are right by Hawaii, where a lot of smoke comes through, or fog. Somebody might know what those mountains are. I don't know. But the Dalai Lama said that this is where the spirits of the earth all exit. It's through these mountains, and that's where the fog comes in. That's what the Dalai Lama says. And I remember John pointing this out to me and looking at these mountains, and I was so in awe of anything John would say, his spiritual knowledge, the things that he knew, you know, and I just remember just listening to all of the stories and really being amazed. And when we went on this trip, it was also very funny, because we stopped the boat and we were going to go to a private island where only the native Hawaiians lived. And you actually had to swim through this, all the algae, the seaweed, and you actually had to go through a special swimming passage. You couldn't just swim straight across. You actually could, so you would scratch your legs, there'd be all kinds of... And I said to John, oh my gosh, John, we're going to see real Hawaiians, you know, the natives, and we're going to engage with these people. And John looks at me and he goes, no thanks, you know. He said, I'm not getting off this boat, you know. There's no way he was going to probably be able to swim through the distance, you know, and the weaving and all of this. And I remember when I went with Don and Carol and their granddaughter, and I saw real natives, and that was just amazing. That trip was amazing in a lot of different ways. One, seeing the people, seeing the sites that were especially important to John, going to the Byodo-In Temple where his ashes will be. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And that was John's 3 favorite stories of us together. My favorite memories are a little different. John loved the traveling and those kinds of things. My favorite memories were, one, the profound impact that he had on my life. So when we first met, when he told me that I was a medium, and I say this all the time in my group readings, I didn't believe it. You know, it was like a Harry Potter moment when Hagrid comes to Harry and he says, "You're a wizard, Harry." And Harry's like, "What? You know, no," like he doesn't believe it. It was literally that. Like, I did not believe this. John saw my talent. He saw my ability, my potential, and he was the first person in my life to see that. My parents couldn't see that at the time. My parents had their own emotional challenges. When Jared came up to speak, there were a lot of similarities because my parents, they weren't emotionally well. And John was that emotional father figure for me. He was the first healthy, older adult in my life that took an interest in me. Nobody did in my family and my parents. It was John. And for him to tell me, you know, "Sweetheart, you're so smart." You know, I didn't believe it. I just said, well, you know, I failed out of my first year of college. I wanted to be pre-med. I've totally failed. I bombed every freaking course. I studied for hours in the library, still sucked. And he said, "No, sweetheart, you really are. You really are." And then I switched my degree to psychology. And I got straight A's on everything without studying ever. It just intuitively came. I never thought I would ever be able to go on for a PhD. It was John. John told me, "Sweetheart, you don't know how smart you are." He said, "How much insight, how much clarity you have." And it was John pushing me. I got 2 master's degrees. 2. Most people don't even have 1. It was John. John behind me all the way. I wanted John to see me graduate one more time. He was there for every other graduation. He was there for my undergrad. He was there for my master's. I really wanted him to be there physically for my PhD. I know he'll be there in spirit. I know he won't miss that. But he was the cheerleader. He was the emotional parental figure that I never had. And he fulfilled a role in my life that changed the whole course of my life direction. I experienced so much trauma. So much childhood trauma. My life could have gone in a very, very negative, bad direction. And it was John who picked me up and shone a light on me and showed me what was inside me. And his guidance and support that moved me in the direction of being able to help people all over the world. And he told me years ago, he said, "Sweetheart, you're going to be known all over the world." He said, "You have no idea how much talent you have." And he was right. In my mediumship career, I've read for people over 20 countries. People from all over the world call me and book appointments with me. Sometimes I have to be very slow in how I talk because they don't understand English all the time. And John saw that in me. He knew that I would go on for higher education. I didn't know that at the time, but he did. And he knew that I would be just an incredible, helpful resource for people. And I couldn't see that in myself. You know, I just couldn't see it, but John did. Another moment that was very impactful to me was when John took me to the Arthur Finley College. So John actually paid for me to go with him when I was 20 years old, and we studied under one of his tutors, Glenn Edwards. Now, Glenn Edwards was one of the 4 proteges of one of the best mediums in the world named Gordon Higginson. Gordon Higginson is arguably considered the best medium to have ever lived. Glenn was one of his 4 students. When I met Glenn, he was teasing me the whole time. He couldn't call me by my name. He said, Dunstan, David, Dylan. He'd be like, Duncan, and I was like, I don't know if he's just, not all there. And John told me, he said, sweetheart, he's messing with you. He knows your name. He's teasing you. In that moment, at the Arthur Findlay College, there was a particular moment. And this moment was the most profound reading that I've ever experienced in my life. Glenn singled me out of the whole class that he had. There was probably 30 of us in the room, and all of us are flying to England to learn from the best. Glenn singled me out, and he started reading me, and the reading was only probably 5 or 10 minutes. He was describing my childhood, the adverse experiences that I had to wear a mask in my life to smile and get through the pain. He started describing relationships with my parents, family, and there was a moment as I'm crying, I'm shaking. My whole body is shaking. I'm having a physical, psychosomatic experience. My entire body is shaking. I'm just coming undone in front of this entire group of people. And he came up to me and he put his hands on my face. And he said to me, you need to know that you are loved. And I didn't know at the time that I never felt unconditionally loved. And my family had such a hard time with me being gay, being a medium, having a big personality, having all of this talent that they couldn't recognize because they were regular people. And they couldn't recognize a star shining. When Glenn said that to me, I'm crying. And he left out of the room. I remember Glenn, he said this to me, and he just walked out of the side door into the grass. Like he couldn't stay. I think he was emotionally activated by this reading because it was amazing. He left. He just couldn't stay there. And so all these people are just crying. They see me just coming undone. And John comes from the back room, opens the door. Right at this moment, he just shows up, and he has a glass of wine in his hands. And he said, sweetheart, Spirit told me you needed me and to bring wine. And I said, I couldn't even speak. He saw me shaking, just crumbling. And he sat next to me, and he's just touching my arm. And he's just touching my back, and telling me, it's okay. And he asked me, I'm collecting myself. I started drinking the wine, And we go back, and he asked me what happened. And I told him. And as we started talking, and I don't remember if it was this moment or later, I realized that John was the first person who gave me unconditional love. Who loved me for any part of me, anything that I did, validated me in every way, the good and the parts of me that aren't so great. And he was there supporting me. This memory is such a metaphor. It's real, it actually happened. But it's also symbolic, because John was right there. He was there when I needed him, and he just had the right timing, the right place, and he just was there. And I will never forget that. That will be with me for the rest of my life. And that was how John was with me. It was a very powerful moment. The other few things are regular day things that I'll never forget. I remember John being very protective of me, especially when it came to men. He would always, whenever I had a boy over, because I lived with him in my early 20s, he would always interrogate them, and he would say, "What are your intentions with my daughter?" He would call me his daughter. He'd say, "What are your intentions?" And they'd be like, "Oh, you know," they wouldn't know what to say. He was this man, you know. And they would always ask me, you know, "Who is this? You know, who's this man that you live with?" And I told him he's my best friend, my father figure, mentor. You know, they all thought I was lying and we were just, you know, a couple. But I was like, no, that's not our relationship. We were soulmates, but platonically soulmates. We cooked together. We would watch movies together all the time. In the 6 years that we lived together, it was just amazing to have a stable, healthy home that I could come to for the first time, where we talked about our feelings. Whoa, that was a big one, you know, to actually talk about feelings, to unpack all of the years of crap that were behind me. And he would listen and be there every day. I remember he told me, he said, "Sweetheart, I know that you'll be on the path to healing when you can cry." And I didn't realize that I had a hard time crying. I was much more comfortable wearing the mask of smiling and laughter. And I didn't know at the time that that would actually become my dissertation. That's my PhD thesis, is on humor in counseling. And I talk about how the phrase, you either laugh or you cry, they're two sides of the same coin. They're both ways of releasing. And I realized that I needed to cry. And as I went through my doctorate program, my supervisors, all of them, brilliant people, I hope to be one day, told me, "Dustin, your strength lies in your vulnerability." They said, "Your ability to cry, to be real, to storytell, to communicate in a way and with your humor, it's something that a lot of people don't have. A lot of PhD people are great speakers. They're good at reading from a paper. But they're not always great at talking, telling the story, laughing, crying in front of people. That's difficult stuff." And it was them, but also mostly John, who pointed this out to me and made me realize that these were my strengths, that this is what I have to give. This is what I do. John supported me in my work. I had an office in the basement in his house. He offered me to have my office there. He was always checking on me with my homework. We volunteered together, did community events for years, still did, all the way towards the end. And he was my Jewish mother too. He always took care of me, cooked for me. All those nights of studying, working, he was cooking away. And we had a profound relationship. John's loss potentially could be the greatest loss I may ever experience in my life. I don't think anyone else, maybe I'm wrong, could touch me the way John did. Maybe. But this will always be with me forever. I'll never forget his impact. And I want to thank everybody here for listening, for attending all those on the live stream, for honoring John and what he meant. So thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we're going to ask anyone who wants to come up and speak, say a few words. You don't have to have a whole preparation speech. You can come up and speak about something.
Hi everybody, my name's Charlie, and I've been friends with John since Dustin moved in with him, and I've been thinking about, I didn't write anything down like a lot of people did. I've been trying to think of what I want to say about my friendship with John, and it was definitely an interesting one, and I'll start it with this. Dustin and I were roommates in college, and when I had met Dustin, I came from a very conservative, Christian, strict home, and even my friendship with Dustin started off very rocky because of my personal beliefs. And so, a year after being friends with Dustin, he tells me that he's moving in with this older man who's also gay, who's a medium, and he's Jewish, and he's got spirituality. He's listing all these accolades of all these different beliefs that John had, and honestly to you, the only thing I could think was, Dustin, get the hell out of there. I had too many stereotypes in my head, of course. And then I meet John, and Dustin already prefaced me to John. So John kind of knew where I was going to come from, and John welcomed me with open arms, as it sounds like he did everybody here. And John's and I relationship for the entire 12 years that we were friends was very, it was a lot of banter. It was a lot of John. When I hear you guys talk about John, it's so funny to me because everyone references him as very kind and sweet and generous, which of course he was. But to me, I was almost like the rebel son he had never had. So Dustin was like his prize child. I mean, you couldn't have a conversation with John without talking about Dustin. Believe me, I tried, and it never worked. But the thing about John is there were a few of us, me and our friend Dominic, who would go over to Dustin's house, which was John's, right? And we would hang in the basement, or we would hang at the table with John, and I felt like John always wanted to just be one of the boys. It was just a bunch of us guys hanging out, and John wanted to be part of the boys. So at first, what started off as like us just hiding out in the house, whatever, started to us migrating, and it became our boys' nights with John. But it's not like a typical boys' night. It's conversations that kind of blew my mind. I was very much always like a critical thinker, and at this time that I meet John, I'm questioning my religious backgrounds, my beliefs, my religion, my politics, everything. And who better to discuss it with than this gay psychic Jewish medium? Right? So a lot of our relationship was honestly us debating. It was a lot of times of us going over and him cooking a meal and him saying something because he had this authority when he spoke. I mean, John almost could never be wrong when he spoke. And I loved to argue, so I always wanted John to be wrong. So I would purposely debate him. And so our relationship was always one of us challenging the other on our thoughts. But what I remember about John is, I never appreciated what was there in front of me because he was always like my friend's dad. You know what I mean? The way that Dustin and John, their relationship, no matter how it looked on the outside world, to those of us who knew, you know that the relationship was a father and son. And when I would go over there, it was like I was hanging out with my friend and his dad, so I never quite grasped the weight of John Roncz. And it wasn't until COVID happened, and at this time, John had a lot of loss in his life. He had lost a lot of friends, and he didn't have any children, and so Dustin was in college, and COVID was happening, so nobody was visiting anybody. And I remember thinking, well, John might be alone a lot at this time. And so I decided to reel in our friend Dom and start doing weekly dinners with John, which benefited me a lot because John could cook, and he always bought wine. And so we would start these weekly dinners, and we'd go over there, and John wasn't scared of COVID, but at the time I was, so we would sit on the porch, and I would make sure I'd sit away from everybody, and I would wear my mask with John, and John would just say, honey, it's fine, we're outside, and I wasn't thinking, John was just always very funny with me, but I'll remember remember those dinners forever. The conversations we had were just, they're priceless. And I remember sitting there across from John one day, and we started talking about his career in aeronautical engineering, and I just remember thinking, I'm sitting across from one of the greatest engineering minds that our time has ever seen, and I've been his friend for 11 years and never realized what that meant. I mean, I've seen the planes on the walls at his house, I've seen the awards, he's played piano for me, he's taken me to dinner, but I never realized what an incredible mind he was, because all I was doing was trying to debate him or whatever. But it wasn't until I sat back and humbled myself and realized, like, I'm privileged to be friends with one of the greatest minds that our generation will ever see. And I never even realized how generous he was, even though I benefited from his generosity all the time. And, it's not till we get older. I was a punk kid when I met him, and I was a man when he died. And it's not until we grow up, and it's not until we realized he was a great man. And I'll top it off with this just to show what kind of a man he was to me. I remember my first year of college, and Dustin can attest to this, I flunked out. I had a 1.1 GPA, I failed out of college, and at the time, loved my family to death, but my family, except for a couple members that were very important to me, didn't really have my back on this. They made fun of me, they made jokes. They didn't mean to hurt me, they didn't realize what they were doing, but all of that was just telling me how I failed. And I can count on one hand the amount of people that never did that, and John was one of them. And I remember getting back into school, and John said, look, sweetheart, I'll make you a deal. For every semester that you get Dean's List, he said, I will take you and we'll have our own dinner. I'll take you and get steak and lobster. John loved that I grew up poor because John wasn't poor, and John wanted to show, and I quote, this is a quote, this is what I mean by our relationship. He said, honey, I want to show you how the other side lives. And I remember thinking, I think that's a diss, but I'll take it. I know you're good-hearted, but that's what I mean is there were so many double-sided comments he would make to me that were he meant good, but it was John, I don't know if you know how that sounds when you say it, but so anyway, the moment that happened, I never missed the Dean's List. Every semester I made the Dean's List. So John liked to take a lot of credit for that, and to be fair, he was. Having that support, having somebody who believed in me, and every time that we would talk, he would talk to me about school, and he'd say, I knew that you could do it. And when I graduated, he came up to me and he said, I knew that you could do it. I always had your back. I knew that you could do it. And I think in those semesters we had 7 steak and lobster dinners together. Those are dinners that I'll always cherish. Whether it be Red Lobster, like Jared said, and we got the cheese biscuits, or sometimes he'd real splurge and we'd go to a real fancy place. I'll just cherish that, and I'll never forget how John believed in me and how he always looked to us boys and wanted to be in our lives and wanted to live vicariously through us. Dustin was this gay medium superstar on the rise, and John loved that, and he wanted to live through that. And I was in a relationship, and in my relationship we have kids, and so John wanted that part, and then our friend Dom, he always found a way to live vicariously through us, and I think that really brought a lot of joy to him. So I'll wrap this up. Thank you, John, for everything. Thank you guys for being here to honor his memory. He was honestly an amazing man, and I just never realized how amazing he was until our last few years together, but thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Susan. I wasn't planning to speak, but I feel like I need to. I knew John from, you didn't cry before, Dustin. I've always cried, so I'm going to be crying, so forgive me. I knew John from Sinai Synagogue, where we basically had lunch every week. We saw each other for years, but I can't quite remember the first year he was there. I think he was maybe estranged from the synagogue for a while and then started coming, and he's a little bit of an unassuming presence at first. and like so many of you, I'm speaking of him in the present tense because he's so alive to me. And I didn't see him in his last months when he was so sick. But, you know, he wasn't super well dressed. He didn't look like a wealthy, accomplished person trying to be a show-off or anything like that. He was just a very sort of ordinary-looking Indiana person. You know, and I'm from Michigan. It's not like although I've lived a lot of other places. But you know, slowly I started to get to know more about him. And you know, one of the things that really has struck me today is before I came, I thought, okay, this is scheduled for 4 hours. You know, most funerals I go to and memorial services are about an hour. What are we going to do for 4 hours? And basically what we've done for 4 hours is to celebrate the richness and exuberance of John Roncz, this multifaceted person who really lived his life. And he lived as an artist and a scientist and a priest, rabbi, a teacher, a parent, in all kinds of sort of non-ordinary ways, right? He started as trying to figure out if he wanted to be a priest or not. Yes, no. You know, I think he was an English major in college, which he once told me gave him the sort of outsideness to be able to look at the science in fresh ways. You know, he was not a parent in a conventional way, but look at all the people whose lives he completely transformed, and the people who, for the first time, really felt this sort of love and support. And I don't really have anything to add to anything that people have said today. You know, I was not one of his children. You know, I was not one of his proteges. I was a peer. You know, I'm a little younger than him, but basically, he showed up and he contributed in every way he possibly could. He chanted Torah, which, as Rachel said, is really hard. He was a regular at synagogue. I don't actually know how he had time to do all the things he did, because everybody's saying, he had dinner with me, he had lunch with me, we went on this trip, we watched these movies, we did, and he always looked like he was kind of moving slowly, but somehow he did all of these things. And it's like he lived a bunch of lives in one. And it's just so inspiring. I knew him, I thought, moderately well. Apparently I didn't know him nearly as well as I wish I had. We were friends, but I didn't live in his house. I didn't travel with him. But he was really one of the most extraordinary people around, and he transformed every place he went. And that's a pretty extraordinary gift to have in your life. And I'm glad to think about him with all of you this afternoon. You are his magnificent creation. You did it yourself, but I remember when Dustin first showed up.
Oh, yeah.
And Dustin didn't know where he was going, and John told him.
Yeah, I remember those. I mostly like drinking with the rabbis. So every Shabbat they would have a wine.
Yeah, I remember that.
The whiskey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone else like to go on and speak?
Yeah, I'm gonna do this thing, Dustin. So, listening to everybody here tonight, my name is Judith, and I first met John at Unity Church, and I thought he was maybe just kind of a little strange. I was a little worried about Dustin hanging out with him, so I was going to check him out, you know, and he was a humble man. who read me right away. And he honored it. In fact, I think he was grateful for it. And of course I loved Dustin. Everybody loved Dustin. And I felt like a mother to him, and I thought, well, he's got this pretty good old mother there, you know. It was pretty clear that Dustin was being reparented by John. And every time I saw him, I asked him about his grades, and John would always pipe up, he's doing pretty good, or glad you asked him, you know. And, but the thing was that over the years, John showed up here, and I kept track of Dustin at church off and on, but I'm so glad you shared so much tonight, Dustin, because it just does my heart good. John meant a lot to me personally, but I don't think he ever knew it. But John was this ordinary guy, you know? He wanted to show up like an ordinary guy, and he did. He loved everybody. He had love. He knew what his calling was. His calling was to love humanity in every way that he found it. And he did such an amazing job of it. And he did some readings for our family. My mother had passed, and I had never seen him here. I mean, I knew he was coming, but I'd never been to one of his readings. And Joyce encouraged me. She said, well, come. And I said, I don't know, it's kind of spooky to me. And she says, well, just come and listen, you know, sit next to me and listen. So I said, okay, I will. And I was like shocked at how many people showed up. It was crowded, the whole place. There were people upstairs, there were people on the steps, there were people everywhere. We had chairs everywhere. And my mom had only been gone a few weeks. Was that about right? She'd only been gone a few weeks. And John came in that night and he said, well, he says, I'm going to do something different tonight. He says, people have been saying that I'm getting clues from the person that's sitting in the chair. He says, or the person that says, yeah, it's my loved one on the other side. And he said, I want to prove to you that this is not the way it is. He says, because I didn't make this happen. He says, I was kind of forced into this. So he said, I want everybody to know I'm going to sit up here and I'm going to blindfold myself. And he says, I have this bowl and I want to start passing it around. And he says, everybody take a piece of folded paper out of this bowl. And so it went around, might even have gone around a couple times. In some places, there were a few people that had 2 folded papers. So he says, don't open them, just take one. So I almost didn't take one. Joyce says, take one. So I took one. And he was blindfolded then. He blindfolded himself and he said, there's one, open your papers now, and there's one paper that has a star on it. And I opened mine up and I went, oh my God, I had the star. And I was shaking because I didn't know what that meant. And so he says, I want the person that's got the star to come up and sit in this chair across from me, but you're not supposed to speak to me because people will think you're giving me clues. So if I ask you a question, you tell somebody in the audience and they will tell me. So that's the way it went. And he brought through my mother, who'd only been gone 2 weeks. And later he asked me questions about that reading because he kept saying, and when you said that he didn't see things, that reading, I could have sworn he saw things because he said about my aunt came first. He says, there's a woman pushing herself in front of the lady I think the reading's for. He said, but she just really wants to be heard, and there's other people around. He says, there's quite a crowd of people here. And he said, but this lady's got this huge smile on her face. So I would have thought that he saw it, you know.
Or he felt them.
Yeah. And I had an aunt who had passed when I was 14, who I dearly loved, but I was not able to see her because my mother didn't want me to see her while she was failing. And I had it never even occurred to me that somebody like that would come through. She wanted to let me know she was there with my mom. And they were really good friends. my mom missed her horribly when she passed. So then he says, well, the other woman that's here, and he asked, is there somebody that you would like to hear from? And I did affirm that there was somebody I wanted to hear from. So he says, but she's got this wooden box. He says, I think it's about like this. He said, it's the weirdest box. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he says, she says she's with all her brothers. Well, my uncle said, the ones that I knew, 2 of them had passed, but the other one hadn't passed yet. And she said, and then she had 2 brothers that died when they were children, when they were tiny babies. But I didn't think about them. So I said, well, I told him, he says, how many brothers do you think are on the other side? And I held up my fingers for 2. And he says, she says there's 4. And I went, 4. And then I remembered the babies. And then I knew what the box was, because she had told the story about how poor they were, and that when these babies died, she was the oldest child, and she had 2 brothers that came before the 2 babies that passed, and they passed 2 years apart from each other when they were about a year old. And when they went to the cemetery, those older children sat in the back seat of their car with the box, with the baby in the box, to go to the cemetery. That was my mother's memory. And he asked me about that 2 or 3 times when I would see him. He said, remind me again what that box was. He'd say, because it was a strange, reading. But I was so grateful he brought her through. And then I had doubts later. So Joyce called him up, and he talked to me on the phone about my mom, because, he had some feelings about that reading. And then a few years later, my niece passed away quite suddenly. She was 15, and she died of an asthma attack. She didn't make it to the hospital in time. And it was just a few weeks after she had passed. It was so traumatic for all of us. And I was there at this reading, and I didn't expect anybody to come through, so I'm listening. He goes through his thing, and she was the first one that came through. And he says, well, I have this very young woman, and he described her, and I'm looking around waiting for somebody to say it. They knew who it was. Nobody did. He went like 2 or 3 times. He says, no, she's not going to go away. I know there's somebody here that this woman has a message for, this young woman. It turned out, I finally realized it might be her. So I started talking to him about it. He says, she says, yes, you're the one. So I said, oh. And then he says, it's a very simple message. She's coming through to you because you're available. And she wants you to tell her mother, and she knows you will, tell her mother that her little brother still sees her. He was 6 years old. And she doesn't want her to think that he's crazy or that he has to see a doctor. He really does see me, because I'm going to stay around until he can accept my death. So that was, and then he did a reading for that young woman's mother. He did it by phone, which healed her life quite a bit. And I'm so grateful for John. But also, he kept popping up. And I had this affinity for Dustin, which felt like a aunt or something, I don't know if he felt my love for him, but
you're always around.
So anyway, I thank you for allowing me to share. And John, I know you're here.
Oh, he's here.
And man, keep working for us, buddy.
So we're just having people come up who want to share. So this is the ending.
So John was like part of our family, and I'll tell you the story of how we first met John. It was actually here at Sacred Waters, and John was doing a physical mediumship, and Dustin had said to me, Mom, let's go see what that's about. So we came here and didn't realize there was donations, but Joyce graciously let us come free of charge to watch John and all of his glory. And it was something amazing to see this physical mediumship, because, you know, I had never heard of anything like that. I never seen anything, much less. And it was very profound, very profound. So that led to John then writing his autobiography. And he actually asked Dustin to be an editor on writing that book. And so that started my family's involvement in getting to know him, and who he really is and was. And it's just, oh my gosh, he's just so many things to so many people. You know, to me, he was not only like so compassionate and intelligent and human and like just so modest and just so like on our level, you know. Even though he has 2 planes in the Smithsonian Museum, right? I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh, like, how do I even know this person, you know? But he never projected that. He never like exuded that kind of aura, you know. He was always very, very down to earth. And so over the years, he would come to dinner with us. We'd go out to dinner. He would share family holidays. You know, John's Jewish, but he would still celebrate Christmas with us. He would celebrate Thanksgiving with us. And then he, a few years ago, I don't know how long ago it was, he had someone named Frank, and they would go to the casino together. They would go to Town and Country, take the bus, and go to the casino. And then, unfortunately, then Frank passed a few years ago, and then so we kind of took over that tradition. Then my sister and I, and sometimes Dustin, we would go to Four Winds in South Bend and do a little gambling and always eat, of course, because John was a foodie. He loved to eat. He was such a foodie. In fact, this picture, Dustin, this is like one of his most favorite dishes. I don't remember what it's called, but there you go. So Dustin, that's of significance that Dustin wanted this picture to show everybody that. And of course, John's partner Louise, he's out there with him right now. And then of course, Dustin and John's very special relationship, as you're probably most aware. So anyway, I'm grateful to be here and among people that share the same feelings, and I'm gonna miss John, and I know he's in a better place because he's not suffering, because most of you probably know that he had cancer that was just eating throughout his body, and but he's in a good place, and he's gonna be looking over all of us and hoping good things for all of us. So anyway, I just wanted to share.
Well, Susan already spoke. We've been together for a long time. We've known each other for about 40 plus years and been married for 35, going on 36. And we had 2 daughters together, and John was actually very loving and interested in both of them. But what really I'd want to share with you is the fact that in 2001 and 2002, I lost both my parents. I lost my dad somewhat unexpectedly in November of 2001. And then my mother died just barely 5 months after him. And so, and my mother had a really difficult time coming to terms with my becoming a Jew, because I actually was raised Catholic and I became a Jew. And I'm really quite passionate about my Judaism, so I have been, well, now for, since 1990 when I converted. But something actually happened in my own personal and professional life in 2006. It was the year of our second daughter's bar mitzvah, and John was in attendance at that. And it was also a time in which I decided to quit my job as the chair of my department at Notre Dame. because I actually had a number of colleagues who were really quite vicious, and who, I mean, viciousness probably doesn't quite touch how they were, but I actually had to cope with their viciousness and find ways to endure on their behalf, because it was my job to make sure that they prospered and succeeded and did so for themselves and also for our department. And so therefore I always had to try to keep a kind of strong outer face and do my best to deal with what constantly was a problem. And they were suing me, and they were bringing things against me and claiming that I'd done various things that I never did. And it all went up to the provost and the vice president of the university, and ultimately it was always found that I hadn't done any of those things. But still I had to be, had to take records of my emails and of my anything that I'd ever done publicly, and also depose me almost in a legal fashion as to what I had done wrong. And of course I hadn't done anything wrong. So it was just like something out of I don't know, like science fiction in a way. And but one of the problems with it is that this attitude of viciousness was something which manifested itself in a very strong way after about the death of both my parents. So the timing of my experience of grief was affected by it. I actually came to be increasingly, I'd say, forefronting a certain way of how I had to be, to keep my calmness and to do my work and try to hold up. And I never really had the opportunity to truly grieve for the loss of both my parents. I just never really did. And to this very moment today, I can say that I still feel as though it was stolen from me, and that I never really had the chance to think and really engage with what had happened and what their loss had meant. And there was a time shortly after that, this would have been maybe a year or two after Elena's bar mitzvah that I mentioned in 2006, and I now stepped down from the job and found myself in synagogue one day, and I was actually I do the gabbai work at the synagogue where we hand out honors and so forth, and people come up and pray before they actually chant the Torah. And I was up on the bima at the synagogue, and I was standing to one side, and I just remember doing the work I always do when I'm up there. We were about to close the ark where all the Torah scrolls are held. And then I didn't think much of it. And then when we got to lunch, before we got to lunch, John came up and he said, I have to talk to you. I just have to, if you got a minute, I just have to talk to you. I said, well, yeah, sure. What? He said, well, I want you to know something. He said, I've felt now for years the sadness that you've experienced at the loss of your parents. And also I have felt how much savagery you've dealt with in the course of your professional work. He said, I have felt that all these years, and I want you to know that what has happened today for me has been a sudden lifting of the burden of all that worry I had and all the suffering I could feel that you were experiencing. Because in fact, I saw your mother standing right behind you when you stood at the bima and were closing the ark. She was right there. And just like a lot of you have mentioned this experience of having goosebumps, or I just couldn't believe it. And he said, so I think she's trying to give you a message. I'm here, and I'm happy with what you're doing, and glad that you've come through this and you're going to make it. So I just wanted to share that. I think that was the message. So thank you. So yeah. Thank you.
there, my name is Forrest Livers. I'm Dustin's brother, his younger brother by a year. I'm going to preface this by saying, you know, I probably don't know most of you, except for Chris, Charlie. I'm not feeling too well either. I fainted on my way over here, and I might do the same again, so if I fall on the ground, just leave me there for a minute and I'll get back up. This has happened before. I know I didn't spend too much time with John. Dustin introduced me to him kind of late, and that's okay. He took me out to dinner a lot of times, and we had, you know, deep philosophical conversations. I would come over to his house and work on his flooring and do some household chores for him. And I liked that he paid me $15 an hour, and that was really good. Yeah, because you know, minimum wage here is just like $7.25. So you know, just one day of work, and I walked out with like $115. So John's a very generous person. He was kind, he was selfless, he was a great guy, and what I liked most about him was that despite being an older gentleman, despite being a diabetic and smoking, that he was always willing to help, despite whatever condition that he was in. You know, Dustin can attest that John was there when me and my family were all helping Dustin move into his apartment over at Kalamazoo, and there was John. And okay, 7 years ago, I was 22, and John was like, I guess in his 50s, and maybe early 60s, but you know, like a young early 60s. And so I bought a safe. Safes are heavy, you know, and because I needed some place to store my valuables. And John actually helped me move my safe into my closet. So there was me, this younger guy, and then there's John, this older guy, and we were lifting up a safe, dragging it inside. And he was actually a big help, though. He really was. So, you know, it's surprising that, you know, just he's an inspiration to us all, you know, no matter how old you are, you know, you're never too young to do manual labor, I guess. is the lesson we learned, I guess. But yeah, and he used to take me out to get ice cream. He would talk to me about his profession, which I was very interested in. His official title was, what was it, an Aeronautics Engineer? Yeah, and he told me all about this cool stuff about how he built a supercomputer in his house, and about back in the old days, because you know, that's something old people tend to do back in my day. And we like that. And by all means, we like that. Okay? Because he used to talk to me about how computers back in his day had cards that you punch holes in to do stuff. And he would show me around his house, and he would point to pictures of other fellow aeronautics engineers that were with him. And he would explain all their backstories and about their history together. And I always thought that was very fascinating and very interesting. And I like to think that I didn't spend as much time as Dustin did, but you know, we really did bond, and we shared a lot of things with each other. And you know, he would always drive out to come see me every once in a while, even though he lived far away, so I always thought that was very nice of him. And well, yeah, I guess that's it. Just he's very nice, and was very selfless and very generous. He would always pay for the meal and everything. So, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you want to close? I already went. Wait, this is the ending for it. I'll close it out. Oh, actually, there's people who want to share online. We should probably let them do that.
Oh.
If anyone on the live stream wants to share, let me scroll up because I think there might be some stories here. Yeah, Cheryl Page said she wants to share. And then Susan says, John hugs Justin. Oh, that's just for me. Let's see. Okay, it's kind of hard to see all the stuff. It's like this very small window. Oh, Cheryl says, oh, you can just type it, Cheryl, and then I can just share it. So do you want to be kind of short with it? She's writing. Do you know Cheryl Page? Do you know? I don't know Cheryl Page. Tell us how you know John and what you would like to share. Talk to us, Cheryl. She's not sure. She's got something she wants to say. Oh, yeah. Could you join the live stream? Oh, Uncle Greg's on there. My uncle. Oh, she said it's a long story. Never mind, Cheryl. You'll have to wait till later. Alrighty. Well, we're going to end this today. Thank you, everybody, for doing the... Oh, she wants to call on the cell phone? What do you think? No, we're sorry, Cheryl. You're going to have to share online. Sorry, but thank you all so much on the live stream. We're going to close out the service today. And everybody that came to the today. Joyce, I don't know if you want to come up and share a little bit about Sacred Waters and John and kind of close out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it was just a real pleasure to have him in our community, and I know there are many, many people that were helped by his readings and were healed at a deep level, and so it was a gift that I'm very grateful for.
And I'm grateful too. So thank you, Joyce. Thank you, everybody.
So thank everybody for coming.
The live stream should be recorded, so once I end this, I can send this out to everybody, and then we can share it on Sacred Waters page, my page, and so people can watch the service. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.